Chapter 1703. The wriggling cursed snake kept crawling up Bufang's arm. Bufang narrowed his eyes. Many people around him were looking at him, as if they were staring at his arm. When they saw the cursed snake wriggling on his arm, they all exhaled as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Bufang arched his brows slightly. These people gave him the feeling that this man was also cursed. It would be good if everyone was cursed. The curse appeared out of nowhere and quietly entered Bufang's arm. It should be noted that Bufang was now a heaven god. Although he was not as strong as a chaotic saint, with the perception of his starry sky mental force, not even the slightest movement could escape his senses, let alone a curse. Buzz, the divine power in Bufang began to surge. Under Bufang's control, it kept covering the curse on his arm. He planned to force the curse out of his arm. Poof! Poof! However, under the perception of Bufang's mental force, as soon as his divine power got close to the curse, it was corroded and dispersed. What's going on? Bufang's heart skipped a beat. This curse power was much stronger than the one in Nethery's body. It's useless. You're cursed by Void City. Your energy will be slowly devoured, unless you can get the food distributed by Void City. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang out. Bufang paused. He turned his head and saw that the attitude of the people around him had softened a lot because he was cursed. Perhaps they thought that Bufang had become one of them. This is the supreme curse of Void City. The curse in District D is the strongest, and the deeper you go, the weaker the power of the curse. The speaker was a middle-aged man. He was as thin as a match, but his bones glowed brilliantly. He said as he stared at Bufang, his eyes becoming somewhat hollow. The food distributed by Void City? Bufang was stunned. Isn't there no chef in Void City? Where did the food come from? Bufang asked. Who told you there are no chefs in Void City? The man gave Bufang a puzzled look. He moved and slowly walked towards the center of the city. With every step he took, he felt like he was going to fall apart from exhaustion. Void City is a place of exile for the various universes. The Queen of Curses doesn't care about the lives banished here. She built Void City, and only those who have withstood the curse can survive, Bufang said. According to the Queen, this is the self-redemption of those who have been exiled. The power of the curse will continuously devour your divine power. In the end, it will completely drain you of your divine power. The man looked at Bufang with pity in his eyes. Bufang was stunned. He was actually being pitied. The man didn't say much to Bufang. Soon, he blended into the crowd and disappeared in a flash. It was as if he was numbly doing what he was supposed to do. Bufang glanced at the curse power on his arm. The power of the curse was indeed growing stronger, corroding his divine power. Every time it corroded, Bufang had to spend a lot of his divine power to counteract it. Interesting, the corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. Little Hu tugged at Bufang's hair, then raised his little paw and pointed at his short hand. Bufang glanced at Little Hu and saw that there was also a black mark on Little Hu's hand. Xiaopi wiggled his buttocks and exposed his little tail, which also had a black curse on it. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed as he scratched his head. Perhaps he was the only one who was not cursed. After all, Xiao Bai was not a living being. Bufang walked all the way with Little Hu and Xiaopi, stepping on the ground of District D. This was a dark and evil city, surrounded by piles of corpses. After all, in the city there were people dying every moment because of the curse. Therefore, the bones were very obvious in this city. They arrived at a place where there was no one. Bufang's mind flickered. With a shake of his hand, an oyster pancake appeared, which he handed to Little Hu and Xiaopi. Bufang also ate one. An oyster pancake entered his stomach. A stream of warm energy rolled up from his abdomen, like an oven, roasting his abdomen. Bufang glanced at the cursed snake on his wrist. The cursed snake seemed to be in great pain. It wriggled for a while, but soon returned to normal. The oyster pancake could suppress the curse, but the effect was not obvious. Bufang nodded. He now had a better understanding of the curse. However, he was not in a hurry to get rid of it. Once the curse was removed, he might not fit in with Void City. At that time, it would be even more difficult to find you. After comforting Xiaopi and Little Hu, Bufang walked out with the two little fellows. Wu, a rumbling sound came from District D. It sounded like the heavy sound of a bugle horn. The sound made the numb people suddenly excited. Like a tide, a group of people rushed madly toward the center of District D. What's going on? Bufang paused. He could feel the change in the emotions of the numb people around him. It was as if the sound of the bugle had aroused the desire in their hearts. One by one, human figures flew past him. Those who could be banished to Void City were not ordinary people. At the very least, their strength and cultivation bases were very strong. There was no lack of saints of the Great Path among them. Bufang followed the crowd and came to the center of District D. There, rows of numb people lined up, as if they were waiting for something. Each of them produced a shabby bowl and held it in their arms as if they were holding the whole world in their arms. Bufang narrowed his eyes. Standing in the distance, he looked toward the center of the crowd. Little Hu rolled over and stood on top of Bufang's head. Covering his eyes with his paws, he looked into the distance. That's... When Bufang saw the scene, he froze. The city wall of the central district suddenly opened. One figure after another, tightly wrapped in black armor, walked out at high speed. The numb people gathered in front of the gate, their eyes filled with desire. Rumble, the sound of heavy wheels rumbling echoed through the air. Then, a huge wooden cart was pushed out of District C. The cart was steaming hot, and a strange smell immediately filled the air. Bufang was very sensitive to smells, so he caught the smell in just a flash. It's so strange. It doesn't smell good, but it doesn't smell bad either, Bufang said. Rumble, the wooden cart swayed, and on top of it were numerous black wok. The black wok was huge, like a huge pond, and it was filled with a viscous black liquid. There were also specks of white substance flashing in the black liquid. Bufang's heart skipped a beat. Is this the food of Void City that the man mentioned? An uproar broke out in an instant. It seemed that the food had made these numb people go crazy. They knocked the bowls in their hands. This scene was truly terrifying and shocking. There were many wooden carts, and they were scattered outside the city wall of District C. After thinking for a while, Bufang took out a blue and white porcelain bowl, joined the queue, and came to the front of the cart. One by one. Don't rush. His hoarse voice cut one's heart like a knife. On the cart, some stooped old men were stirring the food in the black wok. Bufang's team was marching forward. The people who got their food held their bowls like crazy, hid to the side, reached out their hands, grabbed the food, and stuffed it into their mouth. The black, sticky food gave off a strange smell. Bufang narrowed his eyes. His heart grew heavy as he watched these people enjoy the food. Little Hu was so frightened that she hugged Bufang's head tightly. It was as if she was saying that she did not want to eat this thing. Finally, it was Bufang's turn. With his hands clasped behind his back and a bowl in one hand, Bufang came to the cart. The one-eyed old man who was in charge of scooping food turned his head slightly and stared at Bufang. "You're new here?" he said, grinning, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. Bufang glanced at him and did not say anything. The old man, on the other hand, laughed. His hoarse voice gave people goosebumps. "It's delicious. You'll fall in love with this taste," the old man guffawed. Splat! Suddenly, a wooden spoon fell. The black, sticky food fell into Bufang's blue and white porcelain bowl. The viscous food was still flowing slowly. "As a newcomer, I'll give you a little discount. I'll give you more to fill your stomach." The old man grinned and stared at Bufang with bright eyes. "What is this?" Bufang asked, frowning. It was not a delicacy at all. "This is the delicacy of Void City. A delicacy that Her Majesty the Queen has given to her servants." The old man said. Rumble. Stop chatting. Suddenly, a cold aura spread. Bufang narrowed his eyes, and a sharp black spear suddenly fell toward the old man's neck, as if it was going to pierce a hole in the old man's neck at any time. Your Excellency, please spare my life. The old man hurriedly dropped to his knees and kowtowed to the figure wrapped in black armor. Bufang frowned. Only then did the figure in the armor glance at Bufang, bringing him great pressure. Take the food and scram, the armored guard said. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned and continued his patrol. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. Carrying the food, he left the wooden cart. The distribution of food continued. The main reason was that there were too many exiles in District D. Bufang walked to a corner with the food. In the distance, a few figures were kneeling on the ground with bowls in their hands, eating crazily. When they were full, they kept licking the bowls as if they were going to break them. They seemed to have noticed Bufang. These people, who had finished their food, raised their heads and stared at Bufang with greed in their eyes. Roar. These people roared and rushed toward Bufang at lightning speed. Saliva dripped from their mouths as if they had gone crazy. However, before these people could get close to Bufang, Xiaobai tore their clothes and threw them away. Bufang didn't pay attention to those people. He carefully observed the food in the bowl. The food was flowing slowly, emitting steam. It was like black paint, but there was a little white light in it. Bufang reached out a finger and dipped it into some black mucus. He rubbed it. It was rough like sand. It was boiling hot, which made Bufang feel a little strange. Even with Bufang's cooking skills, he couldn't recognize what it was. Bufang didn't want to eat this kind of thing. But he glanced around. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. He chose to take a sip. Gulp. His Adam's apple moved. The black liquid flowed into Bufang's mouth. For a moment, it was like a warm feeling enveloped Bufang's mouth. Boom! It seemed like something was going to explode. Bufang's eyes suddenly narrowed, because he found that the food in the bowl tasted unexpectedly good. It was a bit like caviar, but the texture was more delicate than caviar. He thought it would be bad, but it was unexpectedly delicious. After Bufang ate the food, he suddenly felt that the power of the curse in his body was suppressed a lot. Bufang was stunned. He raised his hand and looked at his wrist. The cursed snake on his wrist was shrinking, as if it had fallen into a deep sleep. The black energy continued to converge on the cursed snake, causing the cursed snake to grow stronger and stronger in its slumber. Bufang's heart suddenly trembled. He directly poured the remaining food in the bowl. Those crazy people suddenly crawled over, constantly licking the food that fell on the ground into their mouth. Bufang's face was a little ugly. This food was simply a slow poison. After eating this food, the cursed snake would only become stronger and stronger, and finally, it would completely kill people. Boom! Suddenly, a terrible wave of energy exploded. Bufang jerked his head up. In the sky, a black divine dragon was meandering. On the back of the divine dragon stood a figure. The figure on the dragon flew across the sky. The woman on the dragon's back glanced indifferently at District D below, revealing a look of disgust and disdain. Then, he rode on the black dragon and flew all the way past District D, heading deeper into the district. It was the woman from before Bufang exhaled. A chaotic saint. Glancing around at the chaotic situation, Bufang felt that he had to find a way to leave District D. Chapter 1704. That woman didn't notice Bufang. Or rather, she didn't pay attention to Bufang. For those who entered District D, there was basically no other way out except death. However, Bufang naturally didn't want to stay here. There must be something fishy about that food, which would make the curse stronger. For these people, eating that food was equivalent to committing slow suicide. Bufang took out an oyster pancake and stuffed it into his mouth. As soon as the oyster pancake entered his stomach, the cursed snake on his wrist shrieked. Like snow melting, a layer of it melted. Bufang left with little Hu and Xiaopi. District D and District C were separated by a huge city wall. To leave District D, they had to cross the city wall and enter District C. The distribution of food didn't last long. Soon, the wooden carts returned to District C. Those who had finished eating also became numb and left the vicinity of the city wall. Bufang walked around the city wall. The city walls towered into the clouds, and when he raised his head, he could not see through them at all. They brought him great pressure. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and walked around the city wall. He wanted to find an entrance to District C. However, he was soon disappointed. The city wall didn't seem to be made of stones. It was so solid that there were no cracks on it. Boom! A wave of air rushed over. A figure in black armor landed. Bufang was stunned. After the man in black armor landed, he surrounded Bufang. "Why are you sneaking around?" The figure in the armor spoke. The sharp spear was pointed at Bufang. A terrifying chill started to spread. Bufang frowned. It seemed that his action of walking around the city wall had attracted the attention of these guards. He couldn't tell if these guards were men or women. Buzz, these guards didn't talk nonsense with Bufang. They directly attacked. The spear with a terrible aura kept falling. Bufang furrowed his brows. Zhang Xian thought. Bufang's spiritual energy suddenly descended and shrouded the surrounding heaven and earth. Facing the incoming spear, Bufang raised his hand and flicked his finger, directly flicking the spear away. The guard was not weak, probably as strong as a new saint of the Great Path. Void City was indeed domineering to have a saint of the Great Path as a guard. However, with Bufang's current strength, it was easy for him to deal with these guards. With the help of Xiao Bai and Bufang, these guards were killed in a short while. The law of destruction circulated, and the explosive power surged. Bufang approached one of the guards and asked, "Let me ask you a question. Do you know where your cursed goddesses are?" "How dare you covet the cursed goddess? You will be sentenced to death," the guard said coldly. "Let me change the question. If I want to enter District C, how do I get in?" Bufang thought for a while and asked. The guard still gritted his teeth and refused to answer. "You can't get in. Once you enter Void City, you'll have to rot and die there. This is your destiny," the guard said coldly, his voice somewhat crazy. Bufang frowned. He knew there was a way to enter District C, but the guard refused to tell him. "Wait a minute," Bufang narrowed his eyes. If he wanted to enter District C, perhaps he could only wait until the next time the food was distributed. At that time, the city gates would open, and he would have a chance to enter. The laws of time spread out, turning into chains that bound up these guards. Bufang left the guards behind and was about to leave. Suddenly Bufang paused and looked into the distance. There, a stooped old man was waiting for him. "Young man, do you want to enter District C?" The stooped old man squinted at Bufang. Bufang recognized him. He was the old man who had distributed the food before. "You didn't enter District C?" Bufang asked, puzzled. "I'm waiting for you," the old man said with a fanatical look in his eyes. "Waiting for me?" Bufang was puzzled. The old man gave him a strange feeling. "I know you want to enter District C, and I know the only way to do so." The old man grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. "I need you to promise me one thing, and I'll tell you the way to enter." Bufang glanced at the old man as if he was weighing the feasibility of the plan. Suddenly, Bufang raised his hand. The law of space swirled around him. In the next moment, it wrapped around the old man's body and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was in another part of District D. A group of guards landed at the spot where he had dealt with the guard, sealing off the area. "These guards are under the rule of the Queen of Curses. Fortunately, you didn't kill them. Otherwise, the Queen of Curses would definitely hunt you down. If you kill a guard, you'll be tainted with a curse that you can't get rid of," the old man said. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing his bony arms. "Just like this, The old man's arm was covered in scars, and each scar cut off one of his tendons. I sense a familiar aura from your body, the old man said with some nostalgia. A familiar aura? Bufang was stunned. What kind of aura did he have that this old man would be familiar with? There's only one way to enter District C, and that's to charge through the Death Gate. The old man said. As long as you pass through the Death Gate, you can enter District C. Once you reach District C, many things will be easy to handle. You are not familiar with this place, so you will need a qualified guide, such as me. The old man volunteered. Bufang did not reject the old man. Instead, he stared at him calmly. Why should I believe you? Give me a reason to believe you, Bufang said with his hands clasped behind his back. The old man took a deep breath. After a moment of silence, he turned to Bufang and said, I was once a chef. The Death Gate. As the name suggested, it was a gate of certain death. In Void City, there was a death gate between every district. The only way for the lowly people to gain more freedom and status was to charge through the Death Gate. However, for countless years, no one had been able to charge through the Death Gate. In District C, a vast square was set up. Armored guards could be seen walking in the square. However, compared to District D, the guards in District C were much more relaxed. Some of the guards even poked their heads out, and they turned out to be beautiful women with long, flowing hair. A dragon roar rang out. The mighty black dragon descended. Its terrible aura attracted the attention of many people in the square. Compared to the dead world of District D, District C looked more like a real city with vitality. In District C there were cursed people, ordinary people, and even nobles. In the Count's mansion, it was a building that towered into the sky like a sharp knife. The Countess' mansion was the biggest ruler of District C. Of course, it was under the control of the Queen of Curses. The woman on the back of the black dragon dismounted, and the enormous black dragon suddenly transformed into a human figure wrapped in a black robe, following behind the woman. As the woman entered the Count's mansion, a large group of nobles walked out of the mansion, laughing heartily. Welcome back, Countess Xiaqiu. The nobles bowed. The woman nodded faintly and said nothing more. The maids stepped forward with goblets in their hands. There was a bubbling liquid flowing within the goblet. Countess Xiaqiu took the goblet, drank it in one gulp, and pursed her red lips. Her cheeks flushed and she burped. Suddenly, a golden-haired guard flew over. When he saw Countess Xiaqiu, he said with a look of disbelief, Your Excellency, I've detected that someone is trying to break through the Death Gate. As soon as the guard's words rang out, all the nobles present were shocked. Oh? There are still people who dare to break through the Death Gate in District D? How rare. It's been years since I've seen a good show. The people in District D are all disgusting lowlifes who have been banished. They're all cannon fodder raised by the Queen. How dare they break through the Death Gate? The nobles were talking among themselves. Countess Xiaqiu handed the goblet to her maid and raised her eyebrows slightly. Breaking through the Death Gate. Interesting. Let's go and have a look, she said. Countess Xiaqiu said. After that, she took the lead and walked away. The black-robed man, who was the black dragon, followed behind her. The nobles bumped into the black dragon and retreated in fear. District D was the Death Gate to District C. It was a deep passage. A group of nobles surrounded Countess Xiaqiu and came to a huge coliseum. The coliseum was circular, and the seats were arranged in a picturesque manner. The nobles sat down one after another. They whispered to each other and talked. Countess Xiaqiu was very domineering. She stood in the middle, raised her hand, and a wisp of black light burst out. Buzz, an image immediately emerged in the center of the coliseum. In the image there was a strange combination. A thin young man dressed in a striped red and white chef's robe. A fox and a mantis shrimp were perched on the young man's shoulders. Behind the young man was a puppet made of metal. At the side of the puppet, there was a hunchbacked old man walking. The appearance of this strange combination immediately caused an uproar among the nobles. "Oh, it's this old man. Why is this stinky chef still alive? It's been tens of thousands of years, and he's still struggling at death's door. Tisk tsk tsk. No wonder someone is trying to break through the death gate. Was he tricked by this old man again?" The nobles laugh. In their eyes, the person who was tricked by the old man to break through the death gate must be a reckless newbie. Countess Xiaoqiu's eyes were somewhat complicated. She glanced at the stooped old man, and then her face was filled with killing intent. "Well, it's rare for someone to break through the death gate. Everyone, place your bets," she said. After saying that, he snapped his fingers. Immediately, options emerged in front of the nobles. Seeing these options, the nobles immediately clamored wildly. In these boring days, someone was trying to break through the death gate. This kind of exciting thing excited them. There were not many options, only 3 in total. Because there were only 3 stages in the death gate, the nobles bet on how many stages the challenger could break through. The nobles of District C looked excited. They all placed their bets on their choices with the bets they had obtained from Countess Xiaoqiu's maidservants. "Crush these disgusting bugs of District D to death. Ha ha! It's best to tear them apart piece by piece. That'll be more exciting. We must kill this stinky chef this time. He has lived for tens of thousands of years, so Countess Xiaoqiu definitely wants him dead." The nobles roared. Amidst their roars, the scene in the death gate gradually began to play. Suddenly, a maidservant landed beside Countess Xiaoqiu. The countess was slightly taken aback. "What did you say? A cursed goddess has come to District C?" Countess Xiaoqiu frowned. She did not understand why a cursed goddess, who should stay in District A, would come to District C. However, she breathed a sigh of relief when she heard someone call her a cursed goddess. Once upon a time, she was also called a cursed goddess. Unfortunately, she shook her head and threw the thought out of her head. Then, she turned to look into the distance. The noisy nobles also quietened down. In the distance, a pitch-black ship was slowly sailing over. As the ship sailed past, ripples seemed to appear in the void. At the front of the black ship were 2 figures. The leader was a girl with long black hair and a beautiful face. The power of curses swirled around her, making her look noble and imposing. Beside the young lady stood a noblewoman with a gentle smile on her face. "Welcome, goddess. Welcome, duchess." Countess Xiaoqiu bowed respectfully toward the black ship. The nobles were shocked, and they bowed one after another. At this moment in the fighting pit, the death gate had begun. Chapter 1705. The Death Pass. It was located in a very inconspicuous corner of District D. If it weren't for the stooped old man leading him, Bufang might not have found it. No, it should be said that the only entrance to District C was in this place. Rumble. They passed through the stone door. As they walked further in, they saw black water flowing on the ground, which was filled with the power of curses. The water was cold and biting, like the water of the Acheron River that could freeze the soul of a person. The stooped old man led Bufang to the front. "This is a secret passage. A woman once told me about it. Unfortunately, I failed when I tried to break through it," the stooped old man said to Bufang. There seemed to be a little loneliness in his tone. The Death Pass was a sad place for him. "You're strong, not bad among the saints of the Great Path, but it's still a little difficult for you to pass the Death Pass." The stooped old man turned around and glanced at Bufang. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth and did not say anything. The old man was also a chef. When he mentioned this, Bufang was a little surprised. However, the old man only said that the past was unbearable, and he did not talk too much with Bufang. Their main goal was to pass the Death Pass. "There are 3 Death Passes in total. Isn't that too few?" The old man chuckled, revealing his yellow teeth. Bufang paused. This old man was really out of place with the people of District D. At least, he was much more emotional than them. He liked to smile. I passed the first 2 passes but failed at the third. I hope you won't repeat my mistake. The old man said. I really hope you can pass the death pass and take me to District C. There seemed to be tears in the old man's eyes. Only when I enter District C can I see that man. Bufang nodded. The old man told him the location, and he would take him to District C. This was an equivalent exchange. Xiaobai followed behind Bufang. Little Hu held Bufang's head and kept squeaking. The first stage is here. The old man suddenly said. Bufang was stunned. Their footsteps came to a halt and they stopped in their track. Around the Colosseum, the nobles who were watching immediately became excited. Oh! It had begun. Be obedient and tear them apart. Even if I bet on them, they won't be able to pass the first round. Brainlessly betting on this lowly person to lose. The nobles roared and craned their necks to stare at the screen. Countess Xiaoqiu glanced at the nobles and exhaled. Nethery's eyes were indifferent as she stared at the scene. No one could tell what she was thinking. The noblewoman, on the other hand, was quite interested. Her red lips curled up as if she was looking forward to something. Boom! In the death pass, Bufang's mental power spread out in all directions. Buzz on the ground. A cold sound of collision rang out from the flowing black water. Slowly, a figure in black armor emerged. The figure was wrapped in black bandages and clad in shabby armor. His aura fluctuated, and his cultivation base seemed to have reached the peak of the saint of the great path. Just the aura alone was enough to cause the entire passageway to rumble. Be careful! This is the cursed Lich King. The old man hurriedly reminded Bufang. The filthy demon king? Bufang paused. Then, he realized that it was not the filthy demon king. Roar! The filthy demon king roared. His body was permeated with the infinite curse power, which made his strength reach the peak of the saint of the great path. Rumble! The Lich King moved very fast, and in a flash, he was closing in on Bufang. Don't touch his body. You will be entangled by the curse power and die instantly. Bufang's heart skipped a beat when he sensed the curse power. Boom! The Lich King was bound. Although he couldn't use his magic power, his physical body was his greatest weapon. Every time he attacked, he would corrode the ground and form a deep pit. After a few moves, the ground was full of corrosive pits. Xiaobai stood in the distance, his mechanical eyes flashing. Little Hu and Xiaopi left Bufang's shoulders and lay down beside Xiaobai. The stooped old man clenched his fists excitedly. Swoosh! The vermilion robe fluttered, and Bufang landed on the last floor in the passage. He was surrounded by the corrosive curse power. This boy can't escape. Tear him to pieces. Tear his body to pieces. Is this boy so weak? He can't even pass the first level. What a waste of my bet. The nobles were even more nervous than Bufang. Some people who bet on Bufang to pass the first 2 levels held their heads in frustration and cursed viciously. Some people laughed excitedly as if they could already see the Lich King tearing Bufang to pieces. Countess Xiaoqiu glanced at you. Aren't you going to bet, goddess? She said with a smile. Nethery shook her head and didn't say anything. The noblewoman smiled and said, You guys have fun. We're just here to watch. We'll go back soon. The queen values goddess very much and was afraid that she would be under too much pressure, so she asked me to bring her out to relax. The noblewoman glanced at you, then turned to look at the scene in the fighting pit. The smile on her face grew wider. Countess Xiaoqiu seemed to understand something, and a sneer came over the corner of her mouth. She glanced at you, then turned to focus on the situation in the passage, and said no more. Of course, Bufang did not know that he had become the focus of many people's attention. The Lich King, who was at the peak of the saint of the great path in front of him, made Bufang a little wary. In this passage, all energy seemed to be suppressed, so he could only use his physical strength. This was not good news for Bufang. He glanced around and saw that he was surrounded by the corrosive curse power. He took a deep breath. The Lich King was trying to force him into a corner and then slowly torture him to death. How sinister! In the face of the Lich King, who was approaching step by step, the terrible curse power seemed to corrode the void. Bufang turned his head and looked at Little Hu in the distance. Little Hu, come here. Bufang beckoned. Lying on Xiao Bai's head, Little Hu froze and his eyes widened. He quickly shook his head. Bufang's face grew serious, and he gave Little Hu a serious look. The latter's fur seemed to stand on end. With a swoosh, he landed on Bufang's shoulder. He seemed a little reluctant. Good boy. Bufang rubbed Little Hu's head. Then, with Little Hu in his arms, he aimed at the Lich King in the distance, raised his hand, and gently slapped Little Hu on the buttocks. Little Hu straightened his neck, puffed up his mouth, and spat out a soul demon meatball. The soul demon meatball was too fast. It shot out in an instant. Then, it hit the Lich King. With a rumble, the Lich King was knocked flying backward and fell hard to the ground. The Lich King crawled to his feet. One of his arms was broken. The stooped old man paused. He didn't expect that Bufang could do this. Keep spitting, Bufang said faintly, then gently slapped Little Hu on the buttocks again. Little Hu opened his mouth, and golden light shot out in all directions. The dark and gloomy tunnel was lit up. One soul demon meatball after another shot out and instantly engulfed the Lich King, who was crawling up from the ground. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions rang out incessantly, and the whole passage trembled. The next moment, the Lich King turned into a pile of minced meat on the ground. The minced meat wriggled, but it would take a lot of time for him to recover. And that time was enough for Bufang and the others to pass the first level. Bufang held Little Hu in his arms. Little Hu's mouth was spewing hot air as he burped. It's not too difficult. It's very easy. Bufang rubbed Little Hu's head. The stench of the Lich King's rotting body mixed with the smell of the exploding soul demon meatballs formed a strange smell. Little Hu couldn't help but sneeze. The stooped old man didn't know what to say. He had been humiliated. Back then, when he tried to pass this level, he almost lost his life. Bufang's relaxed attitude made him feel a little sad. With Little Hu in tow, Bufang and the others passed the first level. The nobles who saw this scene through the screen were dumbfounded. How could there be such a thing? The Lich King's body was entangled with the power of the curse. Whether it was a hand-to-hand fight or the approach of divine power, it would cause the corrosion, however. Some of the nobles who had bet on Bufang began to complain in annoyance. After the initial shock, these nobles stared at Bufang. They wanted to know how Bufang would pass the second level. However, the corners of these nobles' mouths twitched, as if they had a bad feeling. Da-da-da-da. Little Hu opened his mouth and breathed out wildly. Hot air gushed out and smoke filled the air. A huge rotting crocodile in front of him was directly blown through. Bufang pinched Little Hu's little mouth and leisurely stepped through the second level. Xiaopi was lying on Xiao Bai's head. Its mechanical eyes flashed, and it followed behind Bufang. The so-called death level was very easy. Looking at Bufang's back, the old man was speechless. Was this cheating? Maybe. Little Hu ran around on Bufang's shoulder. She seemed very excited and happy. She felt that all this was very interesting. It's the third level. The old man suddenly became serious. He looked at Bufang, and his eyes suddenly surged with hope. In the third level, you must listen to me. Otherwise, you will never pass. Back then, it was at this stage that I made the wrong choice, the old man said to Bufang. Bufang turned his head in confusion and glanced at the old man. The old man's eyes were full of hope. He didn't want to fail. Once he failed, he would have to wait for tens of thousands of years. The sea would dry up and the rocks would rot. He was confident that he could pass the third level because he had experience. We'll see. Bufang curled his lips and said nothing. The group stepped into the dark cave. The third level finally appeared in front of them. Countess Xiaqiu did not expect that they would really make it to the third level. Unfortunately, the third level was the most difficult, for no other reason than that it was almost an unsolvable level for a chef. Tap, 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 a gust of fragrant wind surged. Countess Xiaqiu turned her head and looked to her side. There, the noblewoman's gentle face emerged. It's been tens of thousands of years. That guy's body has decayed into an old man, but he still hasn't given up, the noblewoman said. Countess Xiaqiu did not speak. Back then, I was also responsible for guiding you. This scene is really interesting. The noblewoman covered her mouth and chuckled. Her chest rose and fell as she laughed. Countess Xiaqiu frowned. The noblewoman smiled and turned her head. Her beautiful face appeared in front of Countess Xiaqiu. Little Xiaqiu, when I guided you, I met that old man. But when I guided you, I met the young chef who is challenging the third level. Don't you think it's interesting? The noblewoman said with a smile. Countess Xiaqiu paused, then her pupils constricted. The passage of the third level was very dark. It was so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. Moreover, their mental force could not be spread. Bufang stepped down. Suddenly, specks of green light slowly floated up, like fireflies flying in the sky, constantly gathering. It was a beautiful scene. Soon, the countless fireflies gathered to form a graceful and luxurious figure. Just by hovering there, the figure gave off an incomparably terrible aura. The Queen of Curses? Bufang frowned. When the hunchbacked old man saw this scene, he sucked in a breath of cold air. Bufang, the next choice. You must not choose cooking. The Queen of Curses hates chefs the most. You must not choose cooking. The old man cried out. However, as soon as his voice rang out, it was gone in an instant as if it had been stripped out of Bufang's world. Don't choose cooking. Bufang frowned. Buzz, the figure made of ghostly green fluorescent light, stared at Bufang with a dignified expression. Then, it slowly spoke. Brave warrior who dares to challenge the death level, make your choice. Buzz, as soon as its voice rang out, brilliant light shone. Two choices immediately appeared in front of Bufang. Chapter 1706. There were two choices in front of Bufang. Yes, they had appeared out of thin air. However, they did not appear in the form of words. Bufang felt that the ghostly green woman in front of him seemed to be peeking into his heart. A buzzing sound rang out. Two choices emerged. One on the left and one on the right. On the left was a kitchen knife and a wok, which should be used for cooking. Bufang was not surprised. On the right, a graceful figure appeared. Her long hair fluttered in the wind, and her dress seemed to ripple in the wind. Although he could not see her face clearly, there was no doubt that it represented a woman. The nobles who were watching these scenes almost went crazy. I can't believe someone made it to the third level. I can't believe that old fellow really found someone who can make it to the third level. It's a familiar scene, and it's a choice again. I wonder what the young man will choose. The nobles kept clamoring. At this moment, Countess Xiaqiu made another bet. Such an exciting event naturally stimulated the nobles present, and they all placed their bets on the energy disk in midair. Of course, he'll choose a beauty. If he doesn't choose a woman, will he choose to cook? There's no point in betting like this. The nobles did not know what to say. However, although there was no suspense, they would not give up this opportunity. They all placed their bets on women, which was normal. Why did the young man make the challenge? He must be looking for someone. Otherwise, why would he go through so much trouble to enter Void City? And why would he risk his life to challenge the death challenge? Most importantly, in Void City, the Queen of Curses hated chefs the most. Yu's eyes flashed as she looked indifferently at the scene in the fighting pit. Do you want to bet, goddess? The noblewoman asked with a smile, looking at Yu. She seemed to be happy to see this. Yu glanced at the noblewoman. Countess Xiaqiu got the hint, and asked someone to exchange a lot of bets for her. Nethery took the wager and didn't say anything. She directly bet on her cooking skills. Countess Xiaqiu froze, the noblewoman froze, and all the nobles present froze. As expected of a cursed goddess. She really knows how to play and has the guts to bet that the young man will choose cooking. I'm afraid you'll feel despair later. In Void City, who would dare to choose cooking? The noblewoman was stunned for a moment before she chuckled. She directly placed her bet on the opposite side of you. For a time, the bets were one-sided. You bet on Bufang's culinary skills alone. As for the others, they all chose Bufang to choose women. Few, so exciting. Many nobles were stunned. If Bufang really chose cooking, it would really be playing with people's hearts. You didn't say anything. She just looked at the scene with an indifferent expression. As for why she chose it, it was purely her intuition. Don't choose cooking. The words of the hunchbacked old man still lingered in Bufang's ears. He did not understand why the old man strongly urged him not to choose cooking. At this moment, Bufang finally understood. It was a suicidal question. The Queen of Curses hated cooking. If he chose cooking, he might really anger her and put her through all kinds of torturous tests. If he chose women, he did not know what the consequences would be, but it should not be that easy. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang looked at the two choices. Little Hu and Xiaopi were lying on his shoulder. One was holding its little paws and the other was spitting bubbles. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. The purpose of Bufang's trip to Void City was to find you. So, he had to choose between cooking and women. Was there a need to ask? He had to choose cooking. Without thinking, Bufang flicked his finger. Energy shot out and landed on the cooking column. As someone who wanted to become the god of cooking, who stood at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world, how could he not choose cooking and choose something else? There was no doubt that Bufang had made his choice. Cooking. Buzz, the light flashed and engulfed Bufang in an instant. The hunchbacked old man's eyes froze, then turned gloomy. Why don't young people listen to the advice of old people nowadays? The hunchbacked old man was a little annoyed. After choosing cooking, what he would face next was the most terrible and cruel torture. There was no hope left. The hunchbacked old man despaired. He sensed the same aura in Bufang, but Bufang had disappointed him. He had been so persistent in the past. But what was the result? He had nothing now. He tried to persuade Bufang, but Bufang did not take his words seriously at all. His purpose of entering District C and meeting that man had completely disappeared. He had waited for 10,000 years for a man like Bufang, but this guy chose cooking. Sigh. The nobles were stunned. Cooking? They watched helplessly as Bufang chose cooking. The energy poured down, shattering the cooking scene. Everyone felt their hearts twitch. It was as if what was broken was not the picture but their bet. Boom. In an instant, all the nobles went crazy. What kind of person is he? He's courting death. This young man is dead meat. Even if he enters District C, I'll fight him to the death. These nobles would never have thought that Bufang would really choose cooking. The Queen of Curses had singled out chefs she hated, but someone was still so bold as to choose cooking. He was courting death. Countess Xiaqiu paused and frowned slightly. The noblewoman was still smiling faintly. Wow. The goddess was right. She's going to make a big profit this time, the noblewoman said in a teasing tone. Yu's face was still expressionless, as if what happened had nothing to do with her. Countess Xiaqiu's expression was somewhat complicated. Looking at the upright young man in the picture, she suddenly felt as if she was looking at a man from tens of thousands of years ago. At that time, that man also chose cooking without hesitation, and then regretted it to this day. Was the same thing going to happen again? Every reenactment was a torment and shock to her soul. The scene in front of him changed. Bufang found himself in a dark and gloomy place. It was a kitchen. Bufang glanced around and found something fishy. Yes, it was a kitchen, but it was a little different from a normal kitchen. Buzz, the ghostly green figure of the queen, emerged. The empress sat high above as if she was sitting on a throne. She crossed her legs and looked down at Bufang. Since you've chosen cooking, you'll have to take the cooking test. If you want to enter District C, you'll have to defeat the chefs of Void City in a cooking competition. Her cold voice echoed through the whole place. Bufang frowned. Sure enough, it's a cooking competition, but soon, Bufang's brows relaxed. When had he ever been afraid of a cooking competition? If you win the cooking competition, you can enter District C. If you lose, your soul will be extracted and sealed in Void City forever, becoming its slave for generations to come. The queen's voice rang out. Bufang focused his eyes. The price of failure was too cruel. Compared to this price, death was nothing. However, since Bufang had made the choice, he would not give up. I see, Bufang replied. Buzz, a rumbling sound rang out. Then, the door of the kitchen opened. A wooden cart slowly drove over and piled up in front of the kitchen. Tap, 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 the crisp sound of footsteps rang out. Bufang turned and looked into the distance. There, a handsome figure slowly walked in with his hands clasped behind his back. It was a grayish-white figure. As he looked at him, Bufang frowned. A sense of déjà vu rose in his heart. Roar! Outside the kitchen, a clamor rang out incessantly. Bufang knew very well that it was the frenzy of those numb people in District D when they learned that there was food. Conquer these people. Use your cooking skills to conquer them. There are 1,000 exiles here. Cook your own dishes, and whoever attracts the most diners will win. The rule was not complicated. However, Bufang felt a great pressure. The young man in front of him was proud and confident, and he emanated an aura that was exactly the same as Bufang's. Bufang's heart skipped a beat. Is he the system's former host? Bufang thought to himself. However, what Bufang did not know was, outside the kitchen, the stooped old man knelt on the ground. His face was already covered with tears, and he was sobbing uncontrollably. The heart-wrenching grief moved anyone who heard it. No one knew what he was grieving about. Buzz, with a flicker of his mind, the dragon bone kitchen knife and the black turtle constellation wok fell into Bufang's hands. Bufang's eyes were indifferent. He was also confident and proud, which was a strong belief in his cooking skills. Bufang looked outside the kitchen at those fanatical people. They were crazy about that strange food. The man in front of him chuckled. He glanced at Bufang. Then, he meticulously changed into a chef's robe and washed himself with clean water. The knife was like an ice crystal and the wok was like a glaze. This man seemed to be obsessed with cleanliness as he cooked. The cooking competition began in an instant. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. However, as soon as the cooking competition began, Bufang was stunned. The man's movement made him a little dazed. Swish, the man stretched out his hand. His clean hand suddenly fell into the void. Boom! In front of the man, there seemed to be a surging black river. It was the river of curses. It was the river of curses which surrounded District D. The man reached his hand into the river of curses, not caring that it was dirty. With a swish, strange insects crawled all over his hand. They were disgusting insects that lived in the curse and darkness. They crawled toward the man's hand. Bufang furrowed his brows. This fellow was cooking? The man's face was stiff. He looked at those insects with disgust and disgust. Then, the power in his arm shook. The bugs immediately dropped to the ground, covered in the black curse. Buzz, the man's other hand, held the ice crystal knife, and in a flash, he slashed. Sizzle! Sizzle! Black droplets kept splashing out. Those were the droplets from the insects' bodies. One by one, the insects were cut. In just a flash, the man had slashed tens of thousands of times, cutting each insect in half. His knife skill was enough to give Bufang some experience. However, what shocked Bufang even more was yet to come. The man grinned, showing an excited smile. Those droplets fell into the glass wok. The wok kept expanding, and the droplets filled the entire wok. Broken insect corpses, dirty curses, and turbid juice were mixed in the wok. The man's hand shook. He grabbed a ladle, which emitted a dazzling light, and threw it into the wok. The dark green flame was burning. As the ladle stirred, the juice in the wok became more and more turbid. The man's face became more ferocious. Roar! Outside the door, the people of District D, who were waiting for food, roared crazily. It was a roar of excitement. It was a roar that could shake people's minds. Bufang's face changed. He seemed to have thought of something. He looked at the wok that the man was stirring, and his eyes shrank to the size of a sesame seed, because the liquid in the glass wok slowly became sticky. Bits of white substance floated on top of the viscous liquid. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched. He raised his hand, covering his mouth. Damn it, was this the legendary dark cuisine? Chapter 1707. Bufang covered his mouth with his hand. So, that was how the food was cooked. The ingredient was actually an insect from the River of Curses. Bufang had never seen such a simple and crude cooking method. As a chef who loved delicious food, Bufang was a little obsessed with cleanliness. He liked cleanliness, just like the man's performance. But the contrast between the man's performance was too big. The insect crawled on his arm, and when it wriggled, it gave him a scalp numb and a creepy feeling, which made Bufang feel a little depressed. Roar! Roars came from outside the kitchen. They came from the 1,000 exiles who had been chosen by District D. Bufang had seen the fanaticism and craziness of those exiles for this dark cuisine. From the very beginning, this cooking competition was unfair. Bufang was on the side that was absolutely crushed. At this moment, Bufang, whose mind was shaken, was a little confused. He was still savoring the disgusting taste of the dark cuisine. Of course, for a moment, Bufang couldn't think of any dish or delicacy that could defeat this dark cuisine. He wanted the exiles of District D, who had long been attracted by the dark cuisine, to choose his food. I lost. With tears in his eyes, the stooped old man looked at the scene. He could empathize with Bufang's confusion. Not too long ago, he had also been at a loss like this. Then, he had completely failed, completely and utterly lost. Looking at the man, the stooped old man's face was very complicated. This was him, who he used to be, that was his past. However, he was imprisoned by the Queen of Curses and sealed in this death pass for generations to come. The Queen of Curses. The stooped old man clenched his fists. However, a wisp of dark curse rose, making his whole body convulse in pain. Blurg, this food is too disgusting. Only the disgusting insects of District D would eat this thing. This is a reward from the Queen. It can suppress the curse. They should be grateful. The nobles also saw the man's cooking, and their expressions changed. Some of them even covered their mouths with an ugly expression. Indeed, this kind of cooking had a huge impact on them, although they already knew how to cook this kind of food. However, every time they looked at it, they would feel nauseous from the depths of their bodies. That was why they looked down on the people of District D. In their eyes, the people of District D who ate this kind of food were like ants and worms. Although it's disgusting, there's no doubt, this chef can't beat this food. Some nobles smiled and shook their heads. Although they had lost the bet, but it didn't stop them from winning in the following bet. The bet was also initiated by Countess Xiaqiu, and the winner and loser of the bet would be chosen. The question was whether Bufang could win. Without a doubt, these nobles all bet that Bufang would lose. No one could beat this kind of food. It was a temptation from the soul. Like a poison, it made the insects of District D crazy with love. You was very indifferent. She looked at Bufang, and her expression didn't change. It was as if nothing could cause her expression to change. She had long been indifferent to everything. The noblewoman, on the other hand, was smiling with great interest. I'm looking forward to how this little guy will deal with it. If he can't, he'll be better off dead than alive. The noblewoman chuckled. What kind of food should Bufang cook? No one knew what Bufang would choose. Although they were not chefs, if they put themselves in his shoes, they could only despair. Those people were attracted by this dark cuisine, and it was impossible for them to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. Bufang also felt great pressure. He had never expected this dark cuisine to appear. Bufang had tasted a small bite of it, but it was just a small bite. After that, Bufang didn't dare to taste more. It was a kind of food that worked on the soul level, something that could make those people crazy. For Bufang, it was a dark cuisine, but for the exiled people of District D, it might be a real delicacy. It's like trying to change a stereotype. It's really hard. Habits were the most terrifying, not to mention crazy, brainless habit. From the beginning, choosing to cook was destined to fail. Bufang furrowed his brows and thought carefully. He had to come up with a countermeasure. In fact, cooking was not absolute. It was just a matter of whether Bufang could think of it or not. He touched his chin. Bufang's mind moved. With a buzz, he sank into the heaven and earth farmland. Cattle and sheep could be seen in the wind. The heaven and earth farmland was as beautiful as ever. It was quiet and leisurely. Nyo Han-san was lying on a recliner, enjoying the comfortable wind and sleeping soundly. Bufang's appearance woke him up. As the father of hybridization, Nyo Han-san, Bufang felt that he might have a better way to deal with the dark cuisine. After all, this guy might be a bastard who had stuffed the heavenly Tao into his ingredients. Therefore, Bufang talked to Nyo Han-san about the current situation. There's such a thing? They actually dare to use dark cuisine in front of Owner Bu? Nyo Han-san was a little shocked. Nyo Han-san got up, pacing back and forth in front of the wooden hut. Bufang also thought for a while. Suddenly, Nyo Han-san slammed his fist. Owner Bu, the reason why those exiles like that dark cuisine, why? Isn't it because that dark cuisine can suppress their curse? Although it's a slow, suicidal poison, the cultivation base of these exiled people should not be weak. It's impossible that they can't sense it, so, I think, Owner Bu, don't think too much. Just break it with brute force. I just need to make a delicacy that can break the curse on these people. Nyo Han-san said. Bufang's eyes lit up. Against dark cuisine, I will use absolute delicacies to crush it completely. Nyo Han-san said. Then, this guy wiggled his butt and went into the small house. A few moments later, he handed a bag to Bufang. Bufang paused for a moment, then took the bag. Inside the bag were grains of beans. The perfectly round beans were of different colors, and they had all kinds of colors. What's this? Bufang was puzzled. Owner Bu, this is this old bull's latest masterpiece. Each of these beans has fused with the great path, the law, the power of soul demons, the power of curses, and all kinds of other powers. Nyo Han-san rubbed his hands. I wanted to wait for Owner Bu to have time to study it together. But now I'll give you these beans. This is a supreme-grade ingredient. Nyo Han-san said confidently. He did not get the title of the father of hybridization for nothing. Bufang had thrown a lot of things into the farmland. As Bufang's strength improved, he had thrown in all kinds of strange ingredients. In addition to being eaten by Bufang, many other ingredients were used and studied by Nyo Han-san. Bufang raised his eyebrows and glanced at Nyo Han-san. This guy is really different from others. Did he fuse the different powers of different universes together? A hodgepodge? Yes, but not exactly, because this hodgepodge was just a hodgepodge of powers, and there was only one ingredient. Bufang nodded. Suddenly, he was looking forward to it. It was just as Nyo Han-san had said. He could defeat everything with brute force. No matter what trick he used, he could just break it with brute force. Bufang's fingers dug into the beans, and he couldn't help but look forward to seeing the rainbow-colored beans. Let's go, Bufang said. The next moment, he left the farmland. Nyo Han-san crossed his feet and hummed a song leisurely. The father of hybridization is awesome. Bufang had returned. He opened his eyes, and a bag of beans appeared in his hand. The bamboo hat inside was colorful. Bufang focused his eyes and glanced at the man in the distance. The latter's dark cuisine was almost complete. Bufang exhaled, no longer hesitating. He poured all the beans out, and they fell into the blue and white porcelain bowl, soaking in the spring of life. Boom! All of a sudden, the air crackled. Bufang took out the heavy, pitch-black black turtle constellation wok. This time, he wanted to make a bean delicacy. Without a doubt, he had made up his mind. The black turtle's roar echoed, making Bufang's aura rise continuously. His eyes focused. With a flick of his finger, the divine flame jumped out. The scarlet divine flame fell under the black turtle constellation wok. Bufang put all the beans into the wok and cooked them. Gurgle. The colorful beans were boiling, and each one was tumbling. The divine flame seeped into the beans. Soon, a thread of fire appeared in the center of each bean, throbbing. After a while, steam rose into the air. Bufang poured the water away. With a swishing sound, the Chilan transmigration ladle spun in his hand, moving along his wrist. Plop, plop. Bufang pressed the ladle into the wok, pounding all the beans. A piece of white gauze fell into Bufang's hand, wrapping the mashed beans. He squeezed them hard, squeezing out all the bean paste. At this moment, the dish Bufang wanted to cook had basically taken shape. The slightly viscous red bean paste was poured into the wok. The color of the red bean paste varied, appearing like flowing water. It was somewhat mesmerizing. The scarlet divine flame heated up. Bufang stir-fried the water in the bean paste. Different from that man's pure black food, Bufang's 7-colored bean paste looked more beautiful. However, those people outside the kitchen weren't interested in Bufang's bean paste at all. They were crazily roaring at that man's food. Bufang calmed his mind. He didn't feel happy about other things, nor did he feel sad about himself. He focused on cooking the food in his hand. It was a long process to stir-fry the water in the bean paste. Moreover, he needed to stir-fry it with a gentle flame, not too fast or too slow. This was somewhat similar to the cooking of the man opposite him. That man also used a gentle flame, stirring slowly until the food became sticky. After a long time, Bufang added the honey and oil juice into the stir-fried bean paste. His palm was covered with energy, and he plunged it into the wok, taking out the bean paste. Buzz, the bean paste spun in Bufang's hand, turning into a rotating 7-colored ball. It was warm, luxurious, and mesmerizing. He let the bean paste float in the air. Bufang released a cold aura, freezing the bean paste. On the other side, he began to knead the flour. The process of making noodles was too familiar for Bufang. The dough flew and turned into a ball, floating in the air, echoing the 7-colored bean paste ball. In the distance, that man had finished cooking. Rumble. He poured the food in the glass wok into the black wok on the wooden cart. Hot air was boiling above the black wok. As for him, he took out a clean white cloth and wiped his hand. Bit by bit, he wiped them carefully and carefully. In a short while, he wiped them clean. The man's dish was finished. Outside the kitchen, the exiled people had gone completely mad. They crowded at the door, rushing at the kitchen door, making it seem as if the door was about to burst open. Bufang's face was calm. He glanced at everything outside the door, his expression unchanged. He kneaded the flour, not too fast or too slow, wrapping the buns like a Buddha. That's right. This time, what Bufang was going to make was bean paste buns. Bufang's slender and fair hands were very flexible. The flour flew, wrapping the 7-colored bean paste. After kneading, it quickly turned into various shapes. There were cute bunnies, cute little sheep, and even Bufang made bean paste buns in the form of little Hu and Xiaopi. This kind of casual cooking stunned the group of people. Many people thought that Bufang had chosen to give up and give up. Basket after basket of bean paste buns were pushed into the steamer by Bufang. Bufang was also looking forward to what would happen when these bean paste buns came out of the steamer. An unconventional dark cuisine? In that case, let me use the cute and small bean paste buns to have a head-on collision. Boom! Bufang snapped his fingers. Under the steamer, the fire rose to the sky. Chapter 1708. Under the light of the fire, the steamer glowed with a colorful light that seemed to be brewing and swirling in it, ready to burst into 1,000 rays of light at any time. The scene of the steamer was transmitted to everyone's eyes through the screen in the fighting pit. The nobles were all sneering. They had seen with their own eyes how Bufang made the bean buns. They reckoned that the chef had given up on himself. He made the bun into the shape of a rabbit and a little who, why don't you make it into the shape of a pile of **T? You're just messing around anyway. They had been slapped in the face by Bufang time and time again, but they were very persistent about this last time because they felt that Bufang had no chance of winning. They were the nobles of District C. In fact, among the 4 districts A, B, C, and D, only District D was an exception. District D was a lower-class district, and the people there were all lowly exiles. Those people were corroded and tortured by the curse, and they needed that kind of food to suppress the pain brought by the curse. No matter how disgusting that kind of food was, it could not hide the fact that it was the food of their dreams. Moreover, to the exiles, the food wasn't that bad. So, what did Bufang rely on to win? Bufang was not on the same level as the chefs of Void City. The outcome of the battle became simple and clear. The people of District D would never look at Bufang's food. That's right, they would not even look at it. In the eyes of those lowly people, only the food made of the insects in the river of curses could arouse their appetite. Bufang did it very casually, and he did it happily. The light of the fire made his face dance with colors. Cooking is a happy thing, and tasting food is also a happy thing. Why do I have to put so many restrictions on myself? Bufang thought to himself. At the thought of this, his thoughts became clearer. Gurgle, the steam rose up into the air. The life force in the spring of life dissipated into the air, as if it was purifying everything. The fire gradually dimmed. In the end, only a flame that looked like a fire lotus was left burning. After burning for a while, the flames completely dissipated. It turned into a fire thread and wrapped around Bufang's fingertip. Rainbow Fantasy Bean Paste Buns, done. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He seemed to be quite satisfied with his cooking this time. An uproar broke out. Bufang had finished cooking, which meant that the next step was a real competition. Could he win? That would definitely be a definite loss. The nobles sneered. They had no hope for Bufang at all. Of course, they also bet on Bufang to lose. Moreover, some of the nobles had even bet all of their wealth on the bet. After all, it was very exciting to have such a bet in the past 10,000 years. The man looked at Bufang with a meaningful look in his eyes. The next moment, the man jumped onto the wooden cart. At that moment, Bufang was a little dazed. Bufang was stunned. He felt that this man was a little familiar, somewhat similar to the hunchbacked old man. Could it be that there was a connection between the two? Or could it be that this man was the young elder? But why were the young old man and the hunchbacked old man separated? Bufang suddenly understood. This should be the curse that the Queen of Curses mentioned and the seal that would last forever. The hunchbacked old man was also a man with a story. No wonder the latter always told Bufang not to choose cooking. It turned out that this was the reason. The old man was a man who had been injured. Rumble, as Bufang finished cooking, there seemed to be a strange will in the void, guiding Bufang. Bufang opened the steamer and took out a round blue and white porcelain plate. As soon as the steamer was opened, waves of hot air surged into the sky. Bufang grabbed a pair of chopsticks and carefully picked out the bean buns. Each of them was so lifelike as if they had come to life. It seemed that as long as Bufang touched his eyes on the buns, he could give them life. It was a mysterious feeling, as if he was the creator. Of course, Bufang would not be infatuated with this feeling. A little sauce was dripped onto the red bean buns. With a rumble, the buns were filled with all kinds of power of law, as if they had all kinds of forms. Some of them had a peaceful aura. Some of them had a murderous aura. Some of them even had a curse spreading. All in all, this was a unique steamer of bean buns. The white and tender surface of the red bean paste bun made Bufang feel a little hungry as he looked at it. The smell of bean paste filled the air, making Bufang want to close his eyes and feel the sweet taste. Bufang licked his lips, a little excited and a little enjoying. No matter what, the food he cooked was good. Boom! The door of the kitchen was thrown open. One by one, the exiles rushed into the kitchen like madmen. However, they were struck by a mysterious force and were all sent flying. Even though there were saints of the great path among them, they suffered the same fate. One by one, they flew backward and fell to the ground, but when they got up, they rushed over greedily again. I want to eat. I want to eat. Give it to me now. I can't stand it anymore. I want food. The scene of the exiles going crazy was quite shocking. At least, for the nobles, it was a rare sight to see, and it impacted their hearts. Countess Xiaqiu was fine. She occasionally passed by District D, and she could see this scene. As for the other nobles, they had never experienced this before. They simply could not understand this kind of madness. These filthy fellows, despicable, crazy. Their edges and corners have been ground away, and they have lost their basic rights as human beings. These reptiles deserve to be exiled. The nobles clamored wildly, scolding and cursing. They were infatuated with the feeling of being superior. Void City was such a realistic place. For some people, it was heaven, but for the exiles, it was hell. Some exiles had once chosen to revolt, but the Queen of Curses was suppressing them. The so-called revolt was a joke, and it was wiped out with a flip of her hand. Rumble, the Queen of Curses figure reappeared. It was a noble woman sitting on a throne. She crossed her long, slender legs, which exuded a noble aura. Although it was made up of light spots, it gave people the feeling that it was real and close at hand. Stand down, all of you. The Queen's cold voice rang out. The next moment the exiles froze. They, who had gone crazy, knelt on the ground, not daring to move. The Queen's aura made these exiles feel incomparably terrified. Even if you are the lowliest exiles, you belong to Void City. Maintain order, and don't bring shame to my city. Those who disobey will be obliterated. The Queen of Curses said coldly. As soon as her voice rang out, an exiled man, who was waiting for an opportunity to pounce on the wooden cart and the dark cuisine, had his head burst and was completely corroded by the curse. After one person died, the Queen teleported another person from District D to this place. With this, no one dared to act presumptuously. The two of you will promote your dishes. There are 1,000 people here, and they will evaluate your dishes. For every exiled you capture, the curse power on your wooden cart will increase a little. In the end, the one with the highest curse power will win, the Queen of Curses said faintly. The rules were announced. The man smiled faintly. He did not take it seriously. Promote? His dishes did not need to be promoted. Bufang narrowed his eyes, clasped his hands behind his back, and stood as still as a mountain. What was promotion? He did not have this concept. He was confident in his dishes. As soon as the rules were announced, the nobles were eager to make a move. They all cried out excitedly. Yu's face was indifferent, and the look in her eyes did not even flicker. Countess Xiaqiu was very interested. The noblewoman also watched with great interest. The stooped old man stared blankly at the scene. His eyes were full of despair. When? How? There was no possibility or hope of winning at all. It was over. Everything was over. Bufang would die without a doubt. The stooped old man heaved a long sigh. Now let's start the party. The Queen's voice rang out. Then the whole scene boiled over. Those exiles, who were shrouded in curse power and had frenzied expressions on their faces, dashed madly towards the wooden carriage. Everyone trembled and stared at the scene. However, the next moment, everything that appeared on the screen made them burst out laughing. Everything was as they had expected. It was over before it had even begun. 1,000 exiles flew madly toward the wooden cart where the man was. The noise was deafening, and the scene suddenly became very crowded. The man smiled faintly. He clasped his hands behind his back. With a wave of his hand, countless shabby porcelain bowls flew out. He poured the sticky dark cuisine into the bowls, spoonful by spoonful. So what if the ingredients were dirty? So what if the cooking method was simple and crude? These people had been eating his food for tens of thousands of years. How could they fail so easily just because of Bufang's appearance? The only one who could defeat him was himself. The man's confidence almost soared to the sky. Slurp, slurp. Those people grabbed the bowls and crazily poured the food in them into their mouth. Some even couldn't wait to grab the food with their hands and shove it into their mouth. Their table manners were full of different emotions. 1 portion, 2 portions, 3 portions. A terrible bestial roar seemed to ring out from the man's wooden cart. Then, the curse power in the form of a black dragon kept rising, bursting out with a boundless aura behind the man. 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. The power of the curse soared into the sky, rising continuously. The man stood confidently under the pillar of curse, as if he was looking down at the world. The stooped old man looked at his former self with a bitter look on his face. Perhaps his past self didn't even know that he had been sealed in this death pass for all eternity. He could only appear when someone passed the death pass and reached the third. Otherwise, he could only wander in the endless darkness. So, why are you showing off? For some reason, the stooped old man felt a little sad. 50 feet, 60 feet, soon, the pillar of curse behind the man broke through the 100 feet mark. More and more people chose his dark cuisine, and in just a short while, the number had exceeded 300. On the other hand, Bufang's wooden cart was silent. It was so quiet. There were even sparrows on it. There was not a single exile among them. The contrast was intense, the contrast was enormous. Bufang did not even get a wisp of the pillar of curse. Is there even a need to compete? This is too miserable, a nobleman said with a smile. He was gloating. Sure enough, Her Excellency the Queen hates chefs the most. This is the most extreme blow to chef. In fact, the food you cook is no match for the dark cuisine made from the worms at the bottom of the river of curse. This blow would definitely make a chef, who thought highly of himself, despair. Didn't that old man lose his faith in this way? It looks like this young man is going to repeat the same mistake. In everyone's opinion, Bufang was bound to lose. Yu's eyes flickered. The nobleman chuckled and shook her head, feeling a little regretful. Countess Xiaqiu, on the other hand, looked disappointed. In fact, she hoped that Bufang would succeed. That man had failed, and she did not want this young man to repeat that man's mistake. After all, Countess Xiaqiu saw the shadow of that man in him. Am I really going to lose? Standing in front of the wooden cart, Bufang frowned slightly. Looking at the crazy group of exiles, he frowned. With a clean hand, Bufang picked up a red bean bun. With a gentle pinch, he tore it apart. Rumble! A beam of rainbow light poured out of the bun in an instant. Since you won't eat it, I'll eat it. Bufang twitched his mouth. Chapter 1709. As a chef, Bufang had absolute confidence in his dishes. Since these exiles didn't want to eat them, he would eat them himself. Bufang reached out his hand, pinching a soft bean paste bun. This bean paste bun was in the shape of a little hu. It was white, tender, and chubby. Bufang had dripped a drop of honey on its eyes, which made the bun sparkling and sparkling. In the distance, little Hu, who was lying on Xiao Bai's shoulder, also squeaked. His eyes widened as he stared at the little Hu in Bufang's hand, which was so lifelike, as if it was about to come to life. He seemed a little puzzled. Little Hu watched carefully. She wanted to see if the big brother in Bufang's hand wanted to compete with her for favor. All of a sudden Little Hu was stunned, because Bufang grabbed the bean paste bun and tore it apart. Swoosh! The bean paste bun was directly torn apart. Its soft surface was very loose, like cotton. Inside, there were many small air holes emitting thick steam. A 7-colored light emerged from the bean paste bun that Bufang had torn apart. Rays of light circulated, sparkling and resplendent. Foxy was taken aback by this sudden development. She rolled and crawled on Xiao Bai's shoulder. In the end, she hugged Xiao Bai's head tightly, shivering. It was too scary. The big brother who competed with her for favor was torn apart just like that. Moreover, he was eaten by Bufang. This world was too scary. Did all good-looking foxes have to be eaten? Little Hu couldn't help but feel sad for herself. It seemed that she still had to keep a distance from Bufang. Bufang grabbed the bean paste bun and took a deep breath. A strong smell of bean paste rushed out of it and drilled into Bufang's nose. That feeling was wonderful. Just by smelling it, Bufang could feel the majestic power contained in the bean paste. It contained all kinds of laws and even the power of soul demons, which made it very strange. Are these the beans that Niu Hansen mentioned? Bufang narrowed his eyes. He closed his eyes and stuffed the bun into his mouth. His mouth closed. The first thing he bit into was the soft skin of the bun. The skin was made from exquisite divine wheat, and not only was it soft and fragrant, it even possessed an extremely sweet fragrance. The taste was silky smooth. Below that was the bean paste. The colorful bean paste was sticky, but it did not stick to the teeth. When he bit down, there was a kind of rustling sensation. The sweetness instantly exploded. This sweetness was just right. It was like flowing water, slowly flowing and seeping into his heart. Bufang enjoyed the taste very much. He took a bite of the red bean bun. His entire person seemed to have been sublimated. An invisible energy flowed rapidly, drilling into Bufang's body. Suddenly, Bufang opened his eyes, raised his hand, and glanced at his arm. The curse power that was drilling in his arm began to be slowly suppressed. The various energies contained in the bean paste were a great torment to the power of the curse. The power of the curse was compressed to the point that it was like a turtle hiding in a corner, motionless. This was something that Bufang did not expect. The bean paste bun actually had a suppressive effect on the curse power. This was a pleasant surprise. It made Bufang feel more confident. Perhaps this bean paste bun could really find a way to break through the desperate situation and tear a huge hole in it. After stuffing the whole bun into his mouth, the corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. In the distance, the man clasped his hands behind his back as if he was looking down at the world. He had everything under his control, and he was determined to win. The chef who fought him would surely lose. How could the latter win? Relying on that strange steamed bun? Hee, the man sneered. Those exiles crazily chased after his food, and they were even willing to die for it. What reason did they have to go after that bun? What right did that bun have to attract these exiles? No one was optimistic about Bufang's chances because this was not a fair duel. The queen's goal was to completely destroy this chef. The cursed dragon on the man's wooden cart kept rising, and it had broken through 30 feet. If it continued, Bufang basically had no chance of winning. There were 1,000 people, and the cursed dragon's height was only 100 feet. If one side went beyond 50 feet, there was no suspense about the outcome. It was impossible for Bufang to fight back. In fact, even if Bufang wanted to obtain the curse power, he could not do it. In the Colosseum, the nobles who were watching the scene were all sneering. The only thing they were looking forward to and excited about now was to watch the chef lose and be completely exiled by the queen. His soul would be extracted and sealed forever. However, that chef seemed to be very calm. He was leisurely eating his bun. No one in Void City knew how to eat good food because the queen hated chef. Therefore, these nobles had not eaten food for a long time. Only the backward and disgusting reptiles of District D would eat food. At their level, it was not a problem for them not to eat. Even if they did not eat for 10,000 years, it would not affect their strength. Bufang finished a red bean bun. The feeling of fullness made him feel a little happy. Sometimes, happiness was very simple. It was just eating a bun or even drinking a glass of water. Bufang's wooden cart was empty. No exiles had come. Like mad dogs that had been starving for countless years, they chased after the man's wooden cart, kneeling and licking it crazily. Even the dark cuisine that had spilled on the ground had become the target of countless people's competition. However, perhaps it was because it was too crowded. Some people did not get the dark cuisine, and their eyes turned red as they crazily piled up under the cart. There were even scuffles and fights. Terrible energy filled the air. Some of the weaker ones were knocked flying away and fell into the distance, while some looked even more ferocious. The man watched the scene coldly. The nobles, on the other hand, laughed wildly. To them it was like a farce. Bufang frowned as he looked at these people. Suddenly Bufang grabbed a red bean bun and took a step forward. Then, he jumped off the wooden cart. His confident appearance caused quite a few people to be stunned. What is this guy going to do? Is he crazy? Bufang landed, stepped on the cold ground, and walked step by step toward the distance. Soon, he came to the front of the crowd. On the wooden cart, the man looked coldly at Bufang, his eyes full of disdain and arrogance. Bufang nodded at the man, his face expressionless. He grabbed a red bean bun and walked to one of the exiles who had been sent flying. He gently patted the man's shoulder. The man jerked his head up, staring at Bufang with bloodshot eyes. "I want to eat. I want to eat." The exiled man grabbed Bufang's hand, shouting crazily. "Good." Bufang nodded. He flicked his finger. Immediately, the red bean bun was shoved into the man's mouth. The man's face changed dramatically. Instinctively, he thought that he had eaten the dark cuisine, and his face became wild with joy. Munch, munch, bite by bite. He chewed crazily. Soon, the man's chewing became slower and slower. His eyes became listless. Munch, munch, this taste. Why is it so strange? The exiled man glanced at Bufang. Bufang patted his shoulder, then raised the corner of his mouth. With his hands clasped behind his back, he walked gracefully toward his wooden cart. The exiled man's chewing speed became faster again. It was delicious. That was for sure. The sweet taste made the man, who had been exiled to Void City for countless years, palpitate. His heart, which was like a pool of stagnant water, suddenly shrank as if a vast life force was pouring out of it. It was a taste that he had not tasted for a long time. The exiled man glanced at his arm. The curse power on his wrist began to surge. The ferocious curse power, which tortured him like a viper every day, began to melt like snow in the face of this bun. It was a real melting, not a slow suicide that was suppressed like eating the dark cuisine. The feeling was unprecedentedly comfortable. It was as if the spring breeze in March was caressing his body. Comfortable. Without hesitation, the exiled man turned to look at Bufang's wooden cart. Then, rolling and crawling, he crazily rushed toward the wooden cart. Eat. I still want to eat. The exiled man was really crazy. In a flash, he rushed to Bufang's wooden cart, his eyes filled with desire. It was a kind of hope that came after a long drought. Bufang flicked his fingers. A red bean bun in the shape of a Xiao by rabbit flew into the exiled man's hand. With his dirty, black hands, the exiled man held the white bun carefully as if he was holding a ray of hope. The warm red bean bun gave him a long-lost warmth. The white bun was covered with black handprints, but the exiled man did not care. He grabbed the bun and took a big bite. Hot air, colorful light, everything enveloped him. He felt as if he had been reborn. Tears flowed down from her eyes, dripping onto the ground. 1 bite, 2 bites, 3 bites. He stuffed the whole bun into his mouth. With a thump, the exiled man fell to his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks. The power of the curse was worn down to the point where it almost disappeared. The darkness that shrouded the exiled man disappeared in a blink of an eye. He was moved. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He lifted his head, opened his mouth, and roared. It was an excited roar. What? This roar contained too many emotions, perhaps. He was an evil man many years ago. Perhaps, millions of years ago, he had done something unforgivable, which made his universe abandon him. However, in that red bean bun, he felt the meaning of his existence. In the distance, the exiles, who were crazily kneeling in front of the man's wooden cart that carried the dark cuisine, were attracted by this roar. Their craziness seemed to diminish a lot. Many people carefully turned their heads, looking at the only exiled man kneeling in front of Bu Fang's wooden cart. That man had tears streaming down his face, and his body was glowing with sunlight. A wisp of curse power gushed out from Bu Fang's wooden cart. Bu Fang looked at the curse power, the corners of his mouth twitching. "The miracle starts now," Bu Fang murmured. The appearance of this wisp of curse power brought with it a wave of madness. The nobles were stunned. So was Countess Xiaqiu. Yu was very calm, but the noblewoman's pupils constricted. As the Duchess of District A, she might not understand the craziness of these exiles toward the dark cuisine, but she knew that this chef could snatch a wisp of curse power from the dark cuisine. This chef is something. The man's eyes narrowed. This chef can snatch food from the tiger's mouth from under my dark cuisine? The old man outside was stunned as well. He seemed to be in disbelief. Buzz, the curse power on the exiled man who knelt in front of Bu Fang's chariot was gone. The other exiles fixed their eyes on him in an instant. It was as if a wave of energy had rushed through their bodies like a tidal wave roar. The next moment, a deafening roar rang out across the Colosseum. The exiles rushed up madly and threw themselves at Bu Fang's wooden cart. The miracle was about to begin. Chapter 17:10. The miracle had indeed begun. In the fighting pit, the nobles, who had been laughing at them, no longer had smiles on their faces. Instead, they all looked at the scene in amazement. No way! Those bugs are rebelling! This is a familiar situation. Is our bet going to King leave us again? A few nobles even grimaced. The familiar feeling that came to their faces almost made them swallow their mouths. Countess Xiaqiu's pupils constricted. Deep in her heart, she hoped that Bu Fang would not repeat the mistakes of that man. But she really did not expect that Bu Fang could do this. Could it be that this chef was really going to accomplish a feat that no one had accomplished for countless years? Perhaps there really was hope? But this was something that should have been impossible. The curse of Void City was everywhere. These exiles were stained with the Queen of Curses' curse. Unless they used the dark cuisine, it was impossible for them to suppress the torture and pain brought by the curse. How could these people, who had been tortured by the curse for countless years, give up the treatment for their own desire for good food? Therefore, no chef could win against this dark cuisine. Bam! 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 One figure after another slammed into the wooden cart, causing it to creak. A filthy, skinny figure grabbed the exiled man who had eaten Bu Fang's red bean bun. The curse power on his arm was so suppressed that it was almost invisible. All of this was real. At this moment, everyone was seething with excitement. It turned out that, apart from the dark cuisine, there really was a delicacy that could stop the curse in their bodies. How could they not go crazy? As if they had received confirmation, one by one, the exiles raised their heads and stared at Bu Fang with bright and eager eyes. "Take it slow, one by one," Bu Fang said. In the next moment, he raised his arm and flicked his fingers non-stop. One red bean bun after another shot out of the cart, turned into streams of light and rushed into the crowd. Roar! The crowd immediately burst into an uproar. These exiles frantically snatched the red bean buns and stuffed them into their mouth. One got it, two got it, they stuffed it into their mouth. Tears welled up in his eyes. Slurp, slurp. These people chewed crazily and only felt a warm current flowing through their bodies, as if their bodies were being purified and baptized. This feeling was inexplicably wonderful. In fact, not all the exiles chose bufang. After all, habits formed over countless years could not be changed overnight. Only about 100 people tried bufang's dish. Most of them were weak and couldn't compete for the right to eat the dark cuisine. However, after eating the red bean buns, those people's hearts melted and their bodies melted. The power of the curse on their bodies was constantly being cleansed. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and watched calmly. In fact, he had already expected all of this. His dishes could restrain the power of the curse, which was reflected in you. Compared with the power of the curse on you, it was actually easier to remove the power of the curse on these people. The man stood on the wooden cart, facing Bufang from a distance. He was very confident because he was about to win. Although he couldn't believe it and didn't want to believe it, because Bufang had taken away a lot of the power of the curse from his hands, however, it didn't matter. The power of the curse had rushed to 390 feet, and it was only 100 feet away. On the other hand, Bufang. The power of the curse on Bufang's wooden cart had only broken through 10 feet. The gap was too big. A miracle had indeed happened, but it couldn't change the result. Suddenly, the man furrowed his brows. He seemed to have sensed something unusual. On Bufang's side, the cursed man who had eaten the red bean buns stood up spontaneously and ran toward him. I'm back? Those who should come back will come back eventually. The man had a smile on his face. This scene caused many people to sneer. For a moment, the noble's spirits, which had weakened, surged again. That's right. The dark cuisine belongs to you. Only disgusting dishes are worthy of lowly worms like you. Ah! The noble's roars seemed to make the exiles speed up. The exiles who ran back from Bufang's side rushed into the crowd. With a boom, they seemed to explode. All the nobles' faces froze. The man's confident smile also froze on his face. Because everything that had just happened was like a heavy hammer that had ruthlessly smashed into his chest. His chest seemed as though it was about to cave in. The exiles who came back from Bufang's wooden cart grabbed the exiles in front of the man's wooden cart and said something. Then, 1, 2, 3. The exiles, who had been determined to choose the man, changed their direction. One by one, they crazily rushed toward Bufang's wooden cart. The man, who had the complete advantage in numbers, could only watch as his diners rushed toward Bufang's wooden cart. The atmosphere became a little awkward for a moment. The nobles stopped talking, looking like frosted eggplant. One of them opened his mouth. He seemed to see the bets flying. It's okay. That chef is too late. Look at the curse power. Someone roared. It was like a final struggle. The curse power on the man's side continued to rise. Of course, the speed was much slower. It had reached 420 feet, but it was not the end. It was still rising meanwhile, on Bufang's wooden cart. After experiencing the silence at the very beginning, the atmosphere became even more tense. The next moment, the curse power skyrocketed. 100 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, in just a flash, it had reached 30 feet, approaching the man. A tremendous pressure instantly enveloped the man. Damn it! How is this possible? The man roared. His hand shook, and the dark dishes in the black wok began to tumble. Swish, many dark dishes floated in the porcelain bowls, falling toward the group of people. Eat. Eat to your heart's content. Eat more and contribute more curse power. The man shouted crazily. Finally, there was a hint of anxiety in his voice. Bufang was not in a hurry. He sat on the wooden cart, swinging his legs. From time to time, he would casually swing his hand, and bean buns would shoot out. Below them were exiles who couldn't wait to have a taste of the bean paste buns. The curse power was constantly being washed away. Meanwhile, the curse power of these people was being contributed to Bufang. It caused Bufang's curse power to rise to a new height. Finally, it broke through the 400 feet mark. Boom! At that moment, the man looked as if he was struck by lightning. The nobles also held their breath. Damn it, was this chef purposely trying to slap their faces? The man's curse power reached 460 feet. Bufang's curse power reached 400 feet. The gap between them was only 60 feet. Now, there were only about 240 exiles left who had eaten the food. The selection was still ongoing. The stooped old man stared blankly at the light screen, feeling as if something had struck his heart. It was an indescribable feeling. Back then, he had been defeated without being able to fight back. And now, Bufang, whom he had given up on, was about to create a miracle. This, for a moment, the stooped old man had mixed feelings. He stared at Bufang on the screen. The young man was still expressionless and as calm as water. His face was full of confidence, which came from his own strength. Tens of thousands of years ago, he was just as confident. Perhaps, I really have a chance to enter District C. Countess Xiaoqiu's breathing began to quicken. She gripped the railing with all her might, and the railing immediately began to break, with gravel rolling down continuously. Perhaps, I can really meet that man this time? For a moment she was a little timid and nervous. How many years had it been since she felt this way? How could the decisive chaotic saint, Countess Xiaoqiu, have such a nervous feeling? You looked at her indifferently. Her expression did not change at all. The shock on the noblewoman's face disappeared, replaced by a smile. It was a strange smile. The warm red bean buns were torn open, and the sticky bean paste was stuffed into their mouth. As they chewed, the numb exiles seemed to come to life. It was an indescribable and mysterious feeling. Bufang looked down at the exiles who had eaten the red bean buns and cried tears of joy. An unprecedented sense of satisfaction filled his heart. These people haven't given up on treatment. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. From beginning to end, Bufang had been sitting on the wooden cart. He did not turn his head to look at the curse power behind him. He had no idea how strong the curse power was. He didn't need to know either. All he needed was a result. The man's eyes seemed to be sunken, and the pressure made his voice hoarse. The dark cuisine was distributed like crazy, and each serving was filled to the brim. He wanted to keep these diners. Damn it! Since when did I have to use this trick to keep these crawlies? The curse power of the exiles was getting weaker and weaker. The growth of Bufang's curse power was also slowing down. However, the growth of the man's curse power was even slower. 480 feet. The man looked at the power of the curse and gasped for air. Keep going. Don't stop. The nobles were also shouting. The growth of the curse power would determine their bets. Meanwhile, Bufang was calmly distributing red bean buns. Perhaps this is the highest realm of showing off. Bam! The man roared. He punched the wooden cart. The dark cuisine on the cart splashed. His curse power had stagnated at 490 feet, and it was only 10 feet away from reaching 500 feet. Meanwhile, Bufang's curse power had reached 49. It was also 49 feet. Wooden carts on both sides. Two black cursed dragons were roaring, as if they were competing with each other for glory. That scene was shocking. Hurry up and eat. Crawlies. Hurry up and eat. Don't you like it? Don't you want to eat it even if you kneel down and lick it? You can't stop treating it. Hurry up and eat. The man grabbed the dark cuisine and roared. In front of his wooden cart there were few people. There were only a few figures left. A skinny man was trembling as he grabbed the bowl that the man had given him. The dark cuisine inside was rolling, it seemed to be wriggling. The skinny man glanced at the ferocious and roaring man. Then, he glanced at Bufang, who was distributing the red bean buns with a faint smile on his face. The heart of this skinny man, which had been silent for countless years, suddenly became hot. This man, holding the bowl full of dark cuisine, glanced at the man. He suddenly stood up. His thin body suddenly became as majestic as a towering mountain. The scrawny man grabbed the bowl and slammed it on the ground. His eyes were red. He straightened his neck and let out a roar. It was a roar from the soul. "How dare you roar at me?" The man clenched his fists. He was mad. The skinny man kicked the bowl on the ground. Then, he raised his head and walked valiantly toward Bufang's wooden cart. Clang! Clang! At this moment, the man only heard a cracking sound. Those people, they were rebelling. The man seemed to have lost all his strength. He staggered backward and fell on the wooden cart. At this moment, he suddenly understood. For a chef, perhaps only diners were the most important. The skinny man grabbed the red bean buns that Bufang handed to him. He stuffed the food into his mouth ravenously. Boom! A loud and clear dragon roar resounded. The cursed dragon on Bufang's wooden cart instantly broke through. 500 feet. Chapter 17:11. 500 feet. Everyone was stunned when the cursed dragon on Bufang's wooden cart broke through the 500 feet mark. The black cursed dragon roared, and the scales on its body seemed to become very real. 500 feet was a dividing line, and it was basically invincible. However, this was not enough. Because 500 feet was not enough to determine the winner. The man was crazy. He was overtaken. The first to reach 500 feet was not him, but the chef opposite him. However, he did not give up. He still had a chance. Looking at the 10 bewildered exiles down below, he knew that as long as he could make them eat the food, he still had a chance. To him, a draw was a kind of humiliation. However, it was also his victory. This was the rule set by the Queen of Curses. If they both reached 500 feet, it would be a draw, but a draw would mean that Void City won. However, soon he was disappointed. No matter how hard he shouted, the exiles chose to stay away from him. They staggered toward Bufang's wooden cart. Bufang sat in front of the cart and looked at him with an expressionless face. The impact made him feel a lump in his chest. Bufang's cursed dragon grew larger again and crossed 500 feet in a flash. In the end, it reached 500 feet. The scene froze in an instant. All the cursed people disappeared without a trace. The Queen of Curses' ghostly green figure reappeared. She looked down at the two, and her cold aura spread in an instant. "The cooking competition is over," the Queen's cold voice rang out. At this moment, Bufang rose to his feet calmly and turned to look behind him. A black divine dragon soared into the sky from his wooden cart, its cold scales gleaming with a terrifying luster. 510 feet. Not bad. Although the victory was not beyond Bufang's expectation, Bufang broke out in a cold sweat. It was indeed difficult to break a habit that had lasted for thousands of years with the same dish. It was tantamount to breaking the norm. Those exiles had been entangled by the curse power in Void City for countless years, and they were already numb to it. They were used to the pleasant sensation of suppressing the curse brought by the dark cuisine. Therefore, if Bufang wanted to break their habits with bean paste buns, he would be under a lot of pressure. Fortunately, the ending was beautiful. On the other side, the man looked at his own hands in horror. He was defeated. He actually lost disbelief, shock, anger, despair, all kinds of emotions appeared on his face. He couldn't put an end to this fact. In his heart, he was an undefeatable legend, but in reality, he had been defeated. Why? The man clutched his chest, his entire face almost piled up together. Why did I lose? He was muttering to himself, asking himself. The hunchbacked old man, who was watching from the outside, was already in tears. This was him from tens of thousands of years ago. However, he had already failed a long time ago. At that time, he had also failed and looked just like this. This was his confident self that had been stripped away by the Queen of Curses. This confident self was also a part of his body. However, the taste of failure was really hard to bear. Standing in front of the wooden cart and looking at the despairing man, Bufang could not help but frown. Rumble! The cart crumbled. Bufang landed on the ice-cold ground, and the man also landed on the ground. The Queen of Curses crossed her legs and looked down at the two men. This was not her true form, but just a wisp of her will that she had placed here. The winner has been decided. You are the winner. The Queen turned her eyes and rested them on Bufang. But, I'm curious. How did you suppress my curse? She said. It was not only her curiosity, but also the curiosity of everyone present. The man was still in a daze. The nobles around the fighting pit, on the other hand, were filled with regret. There was a girl whose curse was stronger than this one. I had to feed her every day and suppress her curse. I have experience. Bufang thought for a moment and told the truth. He had experience. The noisy nobles fell silent. Countess Xiaqiu was speechless. Yu's expression did not change, but the noblewoman was shaking with laughter. Interesting, interesting. This little chef is really interesting. The Queen of Curses narrowed her eyes. You have experience, huh? The Queen of Curses shook her head and did not say anything else. She raised her hand and pointed her huge finger at the man who had lost his soul. If you win, you can enter Void City and become a higher being. If you lose, you will be completely wiped out. The loser will be completely wiped out, she said. As soon as her voice rang out, Bufang raised his hand. The curse power on his wrist had completely disappeared. Clearly, the so-called curse power was a kind of restraint on the level of life in Void City. Bufang did not like this level very much. Rumble! The Queen of Curses' aura changed abruptly. She pointed another finger at the man in the distance. The man howled miserably. On his body, the power of the curse slowly spread, wrapped around the man, and began to devour him. Then, a ghostly green flame burst out of him. The man seemed to be suffering the most inhumane torture and burning. Eventually, he slowly dissipated. Outside the door, the stooped old man shuddered all over. There was a look of relief in his eyes. It was finally over. The shackle in his heart was finally burned away. To the old man, Bufang's victory was a kind of luck. Buzz, the scene in front of Bufang disappeared. The Queen of Curses, on the other hand, began to slowly vanish. However, Bufang had a feeling that the Empress was staring at him from a high position. The look in her eyes made Bufang a little uncomfortable. It was as if she wanted to see through him. The Queen of Curses' strength was absolutely extraordinary, far beyond the level of a heaven god. For the time being, this level was not something that Bufang could reach. According to Bufang's guess, the Queen of Curses should be in existence at the same level as the god of cooking. In the universe, Void City was definitely a top power. It was even stronger than the chaotic space. After all, as the land of exile for all the universes, how could it accept so many exiles without strength? Rumble! A dazzling light shone down in an instant. It made Bufang feel warm all over. The comfortable sunlight, which he could not feel in District D, shone on him. At Bufang's side, the stooped old man, Xiao Bai, Little Hu, Xiao Opi, and the others appeared. Bufang beckoned at Little Hu. To his surprise, Little Hu hugged Xiao Bai's head tightly, shook his head at him, and raised his little paw to reject Bufang. Is this little thing acting like a tsundere? The stooped old man looked at Bufang with a complicated look in his eyes. The power of curses in him began to corrode him. He knew he did not have much time left. The main reason he could live for so long was because of his past self, who was sealed in the death pass. Now, his past self was gone, and the shackles that bound his life were gone. The old man could finally be set free. Buzz, suddenly the old man raised his old, trembling hand. A golden recipe appeared in his hand. As he looked at the recipe, Bufang's eyes narrowed, and he looked at the old man in surprise. This recipe belongs to you now. You've made me understand that I'm still not qualified to be a chef. The old man chuckled. The corrosion of the curse power made him feel excruciating pain. I have to thank you for letting me regain my freedom. The recipe turned into a beam of golden light and entered Bufang's spirit sea. The next moment, the stooped old man walked out of the death pass. Step by step, he was incomparably firm, with a shocking persistence. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. Following behind the old man, Xiao Bai also walked with mechanical step. The closed door opened with a loud bang. It was the first time in countless years that someone had broken through the death pass. It was something that no one had ever thought of. The nobles were all stunned, their mouths agape as they looked at the figures slowly walking out of the Colosseum's door. Sunlight shone down on the Colosseum. The old man felt a little warm. This was the city she lived in, separated by a wall. After tens of thousands of years, he could finally see her. He had spent his whole life to climb over a wall. Rumble, the death pass was slammed shut. The death pass changed again. As for what it had changed, no one knew except for the will of the Queen of Curses. The silent arena burst into an uproar in an instant. The noise soared into the sky. Countless nobles were shouting crazily. They were shouting excitedly. Someone had actually passed through the gate of life and death. This was a very exciting thing for them in their endless lives. It made their lives, which were as dull as water, ripple. The nobles widened their eyes and stared at Bufang. Some nobles even clamored that they wanted to kill Bufang. Because Bufang had made them lose countless bets, Countess Xiaqiu stood in her seat. She was also looking down. However, unlike the others, all she could see was the old man. That stooped old man, that incomparably ugly old man, had now become her only focus. The old man's eyes found her in the crowd at a glance. When their gazes met, it was indescribable. Bufang scratched his head and walked out of the death pass. The warm sunlight made him feel lazy all over. This is the place where people live. District D was simply too depressing. Bufang exhaled. He was one step closer to his goal of opening a restaurant in the Queen of Curses Void City. Oh! Suddenly Bufang paused. He glanced around and jerked his head up. Then, he landed on the platform. There, Yu was standing quietly with a calm face. Beside Yu, the noblewoman was looking at him with a smile on her face and even waving at him. Oh! What a pleasant surprise! Why is it so exciting? I found you as soon as I came out of the death pass. It seems a little easier than I thought. Thank you for letting me see her at the last moment of my life. The old man turned to look at Bufang. The next moment, he sprinted into the distance. At that moment, he felt a surge of joy that rose from the depths of his soul. How dare you! How dare you! Many nobles around the fighting pit bellowed. At the same time, one black-armored guard after another descended from the sky. They raised their cold spears and stopped in front of the old man. Scram! Suddenly, a cold voice rang out. All the guards' bodies stiffened, and the nobles' reprimands came to an abrupt halt. A graceful figure walked out of the darkness. As she twisted her waist, she seemed to exude cold, killing intent. The guards all turned sideways and looked at Countess Xiaqiu in horror. Her cloak fluttered in the wind. Countess Xiaqiu walked step by step with her slender legs. Soon, she came in front of the old man. The old man trembled all over. The dark curse power was constantly corroding his body, and his vitality was plummeting rapidly. Countess Xiaqiu sighed and supported the old man with her slender, fair hand. Swoosh! The cloak suddenly rolled up and wrapped the old man up. Countess Xiaqiu gave Bufang a deep look. Her sexy and plump red lips parted slightly. Thank you, her voice faded away. A black dragon let out a deafening roar. The void was torn apart and the cold black dragon, exuding a terrible aura, darted out. Holding the old man, Countess Xiaqiu landed on the black dragon's back and left. The nobles did not dare to breathe too loudly. The guards also had complicated expressions. As the noblewoman watched Countess Xiaqiu leave, the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Bufang did not know the old man's name, but that was no longer important. She hoped that he would be happy in his final moments. Bufang looked up, his eyes still falling on you. Tilting his head, Bufang thought for a moment. Imitating the old man's way, he strode toward the distance. Then, he fixed his eyes on you. The nobles were speechless. Again? The guards were also stunned. Is there another Countess Xiaqiu? Bufang thought that you might also run down like Countess Xiaqiu. After all, you liked his dishes so much. The noblewoman twitched the corner of her mouth. She looked at Bufang speechlessly. Rumble. The guards raised their cold spears and pointed them at Bufang. Standing on the high platform, Yu's face was cold, and her eyes did not change in the slightest. Let's go, Yu said to the noblewoman. As soon as she finished speaking, Yu turned, took a step, and disappeared in an instant. There was no trace of reluctance. Only Bufang was left behind. The air suddenly became quiet. Bufang. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. He walked to Bufang's side, raised his huge palm, and patted Bufang on the shoulder. Chapter 17:12. Yu's departure embarrassed Bufang. However, it also made Bufang a little puzzled. Under normal circumstances, you should have chosen him. And just now, the look in Yu's eyes made Bufang feel a little strange. It was as if she had become another person. Could it be that, because it had been too long, you were no longer that netherworld woman? There was something strange about this. Of course, it wasn't that awkward. After all, Bufang's face was expressionless, and he didn't look awkward at all. In the Colosseum, the clamor continued. The nobles stared crazily at Bufang and Xiao Bai. This chef, who had created miracles, had given them an incredible feeling. Of course, he had also taken away their countless savings and bet. The lizard of District D has really entered District C. This is something that has never happened before in countless years. Very exciting, very interesting. This person from District D is mine. The nobles kept clamoring. A moment later, under the protection of the guards, the nobles jumped down from the spectator seats of the Colosseum. The cultivation bases of these nobles were not weak. Some of them might not be strong because of their hereditary titles. On the other hand, those who had obtained the title of nobility through solid means had very powerful cultivations. These people gathered around Bufang, as if they were wrapped in a powerful aura. Lizard of District D. You're the first person in history to enter District C from District D. I plan to take you in as a member of my mansion. An arrogant noble stared at Bufang with a fanatical look. District D, which is under my jurisdiction, happens to need someone to distribute the dark cuisine. How about you? Another nobleman clamored. Hey, Lizard of District D, come with me obediently. You made me lose half of my fortune. If you don't come with me, I'll kill you. A ferocious-looking noble roared. Bufang was speechless as he looked at the scene in front of him. The nobles were like clowns swaying in front of him. What these people were saying made him feel even more baffled. Xiao Bai, take care of them. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and said calmly. The awkwardness of being ignored by you just now could be vented on these so-called nobles. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flickered. Boom! With a clanging sound, the flags behind Xiao Bai soared into the sky. Boom! Xiao Qin smashed into the ground, causing the entire beast arena to tremble. What happened? Many nobles were stunned. This reptile of District D actually planned to attack the nobles of District C? Was he crazy? How could someone from District D who had just entered District C dare to compete with the nobles? In Void City, rank was a very important and noble thing. Ordinary people did not dare to disobey the nobles, because the nobles not only had powerful cultivations, but they also controlled the guards. The moment Xiao Bai made his move, the nobles' guards attacked as well. These guards were not weak. Some were as strong as saints of the Great Path, and some were as strong as peak god emperors. At least in the chaotic universe, they were the peak existences. However, in Void City they could only be guards. Buzz, an invisible wave spread from Xiao Bai's body. It was his domain. As soon as the domain appeared, the guards were slightly taken aback. Bam! 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 The silver spear shot out like a silver dragon, piercing through the air in a flash. It was the guards and the nobles who were sent flying. The moment their clothes were torn apart, it was a beautiful scene. Whitey's mechanical eyes shone brightly. Its incomparably huge strength caused many people to be dumbfounded. One figure after another flew to either side. Little Hu jumped into Bufang's arms and trembled in Bufang's arms, fearing that he would be eaten in the next second. Bufang walked at a steady pace. With Xiao Bai leading the way, he walked step by step. His tattered clothes looked as if it was raining. Bufang walked in the rain. Soon, he walked straight out of the fighting pit. The nobles were stunned. The nobles who did not make a move were even more stunned. The white bodies of the nobles, whose clothes had been torn apart, fell to the ground. Even those whose cultivation bases had reached the level of saints of the Great Path fell to the ground. This made many people click their tongues. Many people were shocked. It seemed that this time, a troublemaker had come to District C. Although these nobles were not weak, they were not strong either. Saints of the Great Path were divided into different levels: elementary, intermediate, and advanced. Bufang's fighting prowess had reached the peak among saints of the Great Path. As for Xiao Bai, he was like a bug. Most of these nobles were just ordinary god emperors or elementary saints of the Great Path. In Xiao Bai's hands, they could only be stripped. Xiao Bai was very excited as he stripped them. Those nobles who were close to his domain could only fight him in close combat. When had Xiao Bai ever been afraid of a hand-to-hand fight? He waved his huge palms and slapped the nobles, tearing their clothes to shreds. They walked out of the fighting pit and entered District C. Of course, the fighting pit was located in the center of District C. District C was not the central area of Void City. This was not Bufang's goal and focus. She gave Bufang a feeling of being a stranger, which made him feel as though he had never met her before. It made Bufang's heart filled with doubts. "What happened to you?" After walking out of the fighting pit, Xiao Bai stood quietly at Bufang's side. The nobles did not chase after him. They just watched Bufang and the others from a distance. It was only after they walked out of the fighting pit that Bufang realized what had happened. Because District C was simply too big. The vast and densely packed buildings in front of him suddenly made Bufang feel a sense of bewilderment. It could be said that Bufang had fought his way out of the fighting pit. It was the first time the nobles of District C had seen such a hot-tempered person. The guards, who had always been successful in every endeavor, had failed this time. He was not interested in District C. His main purpose in coming to Void City was to find Nethery, and his other purpose was to bring back the god of transmigration's arm, which had fled to this place. That was the most important thing. Bufang pulled over a noble who was watching him in the dark. When the noble was caught by Bufang, he wanted to unleash his cultivation base and escape. However, Bufang smashed him down with the Black Turtle Constellation Walk. "Do you know where the cursed goddess is?" Bufang asked the noble. "The cursed goddess usually stays in District A. She's a candidate to be the next queen of curses of Void City. She's not someone you can covet," the noble said frantically to Bufang. "District A, are you in District A?" Bufang furrowed his brows. It was already so difficult to get into District C, let alone District A. For a moment, Bufang was a little puzzled about how to get into District A. However, he could not think of a solution. The nobleman who was captured by him was clamoring. Bufang found him a little noisy, so he smashed him with the black walk and knocked him out. Then, he walked aimlessly through District C with Xiao Bai, Little Hu, and Xiaopi in his arms. Compared to the dirty and dark District D, District C was more like a place where people lived. People lived and worked in peace here, and all walks of life were prosperous. However, even if they were just ordinary people, they had hidden their strength well. Basically, they all had extremely powerful cultivation. As a pure land among the many universes, Void City was a place where the various universes banished sinners. But on the whole, Void City was like a white lotus flower in a swamp of mud, unstained by the mud. There were all kinds of occupations and industries. He even saw a god-emperor-level expert selling cloth. In District C, Bufang stayed there for about 2 or 3 days. In District C, there were alchemists, craftsmen, and spirit herb sellers. There were people from all walks of life. However, the only thing missing was cooking. There were no restaurants in the whole district, and there were no occupations related to food. It might be hard to believe that there were no restaurants in such a prosperous district, but it was the truth. Bufang could not help but click his tongue at the power of the Queen of Curses. The Queen of Curses hated chefs, so there were no restaurants in Void City. It was the 3rd day in District C. Walking down the street, Bufang suddenly felt a powerful will lock on him. Bufang narrowed his eyes slightly. Then, he sensed a figure appear in a flash. She looked valiant, and her cloak fluttered in the wind. It was Countess Xiaqiu, who had taken the old man away. She had a beautiful face, but there was no joy or sorrow on her face, as if she was numb to everything. You can't go to District A like this. If you want to go to District A, you have to go to District B first, and you can't find the way out by running around like a headless fly. There are no death traps in District C. Countess Xiaqiu looked indifferently at Bufang. At this moment, Bufang was stuffing an oyster pancake into his mouth, while Little Hu was munching on a soul demon meatball in his arms. Almost at the same time, they looked up at Countess Xiaqiu with food in their mouth. Countess Xiaqiu was the supreme existence in District C. She was the ruler of the district. The aura of a chaotic saint-level existence made even Bufang feel a little afraid. Countess was the highest rank in District C. There were 3 counts in District C, and Countess Xiaqiu was the strongest of the 3. Bufang swallowed the oyster pancake without batting an eyelid. He glanced at Countess Xiaqiu. You should know the way to District B, right? Bufang asked after thinking for a moment. Countess Xiaqiu neither denied nor admitted it. She still looked deeply at Bufang. Thank you for letting him enter District C. Countess Xiaqiu suddenly changed the subject. Bufang paused. He's dead, but when he left, he was very happy like a child. Countess Xiaqiu's tone was flat, and she seemed to have no emotion. Her words made Bufang fall silent. He thought of the old man, who had spent his whole life climbing over a wall. There was no doubt that the old man was an infatuated man. Unfortunately, he had been tortured by the curse for tens of thousands of years, and now he was finally free. Bufang did not hear any sorrow in Countess Xiaqiu's tone. Perhaps she had sealed her sadness. At Countess Xiaqiu's invitation, Bufang and Xiao Bai came to the Countess Xiaqiu's residence. The magnificent residence was an eye-opener for Bufang. But these were not the focus of Bufang's attention. Countess Xiaqiu must have something to tell them here. Otherwise, why would she bring Bufang here with such great fanfare? Bufang sat down in a chair. Swish, a servant girl with the cultivation base of a god-king poured them turquoise tea. The tea leaves swirled in the cup, giving off warm steam. This is Void City's soul-cleansing tea. It tastes very good. You can try it, Countess Xiaqiu said. This is Void City's soul-cleansing tea. As she spoke, she picked up the cup and took a sip. The warm tea seemed to make her face a lot warmer. Bufang took a sip. The tea had a deterrent effect, which made Bufang raise his brows slightly. It seemed to be almost the same as the 9 Revolution Great Path tea in his heaven and earth farmland. It should be noted that the 9-revolution Great Path tea leaf's grade had been constantly improving as his cultivation base improved. Now, its grade had surpassed everything else. You've drunk the tea and said the polite words. I know you want to go to District B and find the cursed goddess. This matter. I can help you. But I have a condition. Countess Xiaqiu put down the cup and looked at Bufang with an expressionless face. What condition? Bufang took a sip of the tea. The tea swirled in his mouth. Countess Xiaqiu glanced at Bufang, then spread her mental force. Buzz, the whole residence seemed to be enveloped by an invisible force, completely isolating this part of the world. Her action made Bufang narrow his eyes. Why is she so cautious? Countess Xiaqiu's face grew graver. She stared at Bufang. I need you to cook me a dish with this dish. I want to know if you're worth my help or not. Chapter 17:13. Countess Xiaqiu's words gave Bufang pause. Cook a dish? It's just a small request. Why does she have to be so mysterious? She even sealed off the surroundings. Could it be that cooking had become such a taboo in Void City? Countess Xiaqiu seemed to see through Bufang's doubts, and a faint sneer came over her face. In Void City, cooking is a taboo. The Queen of Curse's hatred for chefs is beyond your imagination. Count Xiaqiu said. Before this, the only people who could cook in Void City were the dead or the cursed, such as you and that old man. Her words were a little serious. Bufang curled up in the chair and found a seat that he thought was comfortable. Then why did you risk the great taboo by asking me to cook a dish? Bufang glanced at Countess Xiaqiu. His words froze the atmosphere in the room. That gave Bufang pause. Did I kill the conversation again? Since the Countess had nothing to say, he continued to drink his tea. The tea contained an unparalleled energy that seemed to be able to strengthen the fleshly body. At Bufang's level, his fleshly body was almost invincible, but it could still be strengthened. This kind of enhancement was terrifying. At Bufang's level, his physical body was almost invincible, but it could still be enhanced. No wonder the cursed goddess doesn't want to talk to you. Countess Xiaqiu smiled. Countess Xiaqiu chuckled. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. That hurts, my sister. You know all about it? I came to Void City to find a companion. The cursed goddess you mentioned is my companion. In addition, I also found the arm of Heaven God Transmigration, who escaped from the chaotic universe, and an unknown figure from the Soul Demon universe. Bufang said seriously. There's no need to explain. Countess Xiaqiu shook her head. She did not care about what Bufang said. She had sensed that someone was probing Void City, and she recognized that it was Bufang. But she did not care. Bufang posed no threat to Void City. I want a dish. I want to know, why is he so obsessed with cooking? Countess Xiaqiu sighed. Bufang nodded. To be honest, cooking is a good thing. The Queen of Curses really can't understand the joy of cooking. Bufang curled his lips and said, You don't understand. The Queen of Curses is also a pitiful person, so even though she separated me from her, I can't hate her. Countess Xiaqiu did not agree with Bufang's words. All right, there's no need to say too much. Now, you'll have plenty of time to think about what dish to cook. If your dish can't make me feel your sincerity, you can forget about finding a cursed goddess for the rest of your life. Oh, your little companion. Countess Xiaqiu did not say anything more to Bufang. It was indeed very boring to chat with a person who could talk to death at any moment. Bufang shrugged. Then, he turned and stood up. I hope you can keep your promise, don't worry. While you're cooking, I'll seal off the mansion so that the Queen of Curses can't sense it. Countess Xiaqiu said seriously. This was a very important question. You're really domineering. As a subordinate, I can't believe you dare to stir up trouble under the Queen's nose. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. Countess Xiaoqiu just smiled. There were some things that Bufang did not understand. Bufang was seen off. Countess Xiaoqiu sat in a chair, holding a cup of wine, her eyes wandering. The old man was gone, but she could not feel any sorrow in her heart. She was in great pain, but after countless years of killing, she seemed to have forgotten the feeling of crying. Void City was not a peaceful place. It had been especially chaotic in recent years. The Queen of Curses had begun to search for candidates. One by one, the cursed goddesses who were wandering in various universes were brought back. Under the protection of the dukes, these cursed goddesses began to compete for the position of queen. Undercurrents were surging in Void City today, and it was not as peaceful as it seemed. Bufang walked into the Earl's mansion. District C was indeed completely different from District D. If District D was a stinking sewer, then District C was a magnificent commercial district. The layout of the mansion was not in the style of a garden, but the luxurious, exquisite, and even futuristic architecture gave Bufang a unique feeling. Void City was a fusion of living beings from various universes. It was, in fact, a place of great complexity. Therefore, the collision of all kinds of ideas would produce many different things. There was a description of this in Heaven God Space's ancient book. Heaven God Space was very amazed by the architectural style of Void City. Bufang put his hands behind his back, while Xiao Bai followed quietly behind Bufang. Little Hu and Xiaopi landed on Xiao Bai's back. Xiaopi lay on Xiao Bai's round head blowing bubbles. Little Hu, on the other hand, hid his fox head in Xiao Bai's arms. Although Xiao Bai's body was made of cold metal, it was not cold. Instead, it was as warm as a human body. Little Hu enjoyed the warmth very much. Bufang was thinking about what dish to cook. Bufang had made some analysis about Countess Xiaoqiu. He did not know which generation of hosts Countess Xiaoqiu and the old man were. They might have an indescribable relationship, but they were separated because of the Queen of Curses. Countess Xiaoqiu had once stood on the opposite side of the old man. However, it took the old man countless years to finally meet her again. He even used his life to stir her heart and make her confused. Countess Xiaoqiu wanted to find the reason why the old man made her confused from the dish. There was no other reason than that the old man was also a chef. And he was a chef who was very similar to Bufang. In Bufang, Countess Xiaoqiu found the shadow of the old man when he was young. The ground of the mansion was made of a hard and transparent mineral. As Bufang walked, he seemed to find something. He squatted down and looked through the transparent mineral to the ground. The ground was transparent, and there were many plants growing in it. Bufang looked carefully. The plants were turquoise, and the vitality in their buds was extremely strong. They were constantly spreading and withering, forming a rapid cycle. "What is that?" Bufang paused slightly. The buds looked a bit like tea leaves. He called out to a maidservant in the mansion. The maidservant glanced at Bufang, and there was some disgust in the depths of her eyes. Everyone in District C knew Bufang's identity. He was a reptile who had crawled up from District D. The people of District C had a deep sense of pride toward the people of District D. "Get out of my way, lowly reptile," the maidservant said with a frown. She was a peak god emperor maidservant. Although her strength was not as strong as Bufang, she was proud of her status. Bufang glanced speechlessly at the maidservant, who had a sense of superiority. "What's down there?" Bufang asked, glancing at the maidservant. The maidservant gave Bufang a sideways glance and sneered. "Why should I tell you? And what right do you have to know?" With that, the maidservant turned and was about to leave. "And, let me warn you, the things in the mansion are not for a lowly person like you to touch. If you break them, your lowly life will never be able to pay for it." With that, the maidservant turned and was about to leave. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang looked at the arrogant maidservant, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Rumble! Suddenly, the maidservant froze. That was because she discovered that her front was blocked by a huge metal lump puppet. "What are you doing? Get out of my way, you lowly thing!" The maidservant screamed, raised her hand and slapped at Xiao Bai. Although she was a maidservant, she was born in District C, and her status was much higher than that reptile in District D. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flickered. He raised his mechanical head and glanced at Bufang. It seemed to be asking. Bufang sighed. With his hands clasped behind his back, he raised his head and looked up at the starry sky. "Xiao Bai. Alas, I'll strip you. As long as you're happy." Buzz! Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes burst into a dazzling light in an instant. His huge hand, which was as big as a cattail leaf fan, fell toward the maidservant. "Troublemaker! You will be stripped as an example to others." The maidservant screamed. Terrible energy swirled around her. It was the cultivation energy of Void City, and it could be considered the power of a curse. It collided with Xiao Bai's palm. Xiao Bai's expression did not change. He even wanted to laugh. Whitey placed its palm on the maidservant's body, and a majestic tearing sensation came from the maidservant's clothes. The maidservant was so frightened that she cried out, "That's the tea garden. It's the Count's tea garden. The tea garden with the soul-cleansing tea tree." The maidservant shivered. Xiao Bai's palm stopped. He lightly flicked the maid's body, causing her to stumble back a few steps. "The tea garden." Bufang nodded. His eyes lit up as if he had thought of something. The maidservant gave Bufang a resentful look. "You lowly reptile!" She crawled to her feet, her heart filled with resentful thoughts. "How dare this reptile from District D treat me like this?" Suddenly, her resentful look had not faded away. She felt her body soar into the sky. Xiao Bai's fan-like palm had already lifted her up. Swoosh! The maidservant flew through the air in a graceful arc and landed in the distance. Bufang did not ask Xiao Bai to kill her. After all, this was Countess Xiaoqiu's territory, and it did not seem appropriate to kill her. Meanwhile, Bufang had already thought of the dish he was going to cook next. "Xiao Bai, let's go to the tea garden and have a look," Bufang shouted. Xiao Bai picked up Little Hu again and followed behind Bufang. Buzz! The law of space spread. With Xiao Bai in his arms, Bufang sank into the ground. As soon as he entered, he was attracted by the beautiful tea tree. It was a beautiful tea tree, its entire body exuding a dark green brilliance. A vast life force surged out of it, making it look like a dazzling star. Is this the soul-cleansing tea tree? What a strong life force! There was no doubt that this soul-cleansing tea tree came from another universe and was transplanted to Void City. The leaves of the tea tree seemed to be alive. They swayed slightly, opening and closing as if they were illusory. The tea tree was as tall as a star. A single tea tree propped up the entire tea garden. Bufang stood under the tea tree and looked up. His eyes flashed. Of the entire tree, only the bud on that branch could be used as tea leaf. Just as Bufang was observing the tea tree, a voice suddenly rang out. The whole underground space seemed to be rustling. Bufang paused. Then, he suddenly discovered that the entire space was covered by the dense branches of the tea tree. A terrible roar rang out. On the thick trunk of the tea tree, a hideous and blurry human face appeared. As the face roared, countless branches lashed at Bufang and wrapped around Bufang's body. A corrosive force burst out of the tea tree, trying to melt and corrode Bufang. Bufang's heart trembled at this moment. This is actually a chaotic saint-level tea tree? Rumble! The whole mansion seemed to shake at this moment. Countess Xiaoqiu, who was reminiscing, paused. The next moment, she disappeared from where she was. "Your Excellency, those despicable reptiles from District D. They broke into your tea garden." The maid who had been stripped by Xiao Bai ran over with a venomous face and said to Countess Xiaoqiu, "What's your name?" Countess Xiaoqiu asked, glancing at the maid. The maid paused. "I'm De Hua," the maid bowed quickly. She had a bad feeling. From today on, you can leave the mansion. Those people are my distinguished guests. How dare a maid like you say that? Countess Xiaoqiu's voice was cold. Without giving the maid any chance, she disappeared from where she was. The maid was dumbfounded. Perhaps she didn't even know why she was driven out of the mansion by the countess. Countess Xiaoqiu's figure flickered. She appeared in the tea garden. At this moment, the whole tea garden was covered with countless branches, and the tea tree seemed to be boiling. In the void of space, 2 gigantic tea tree branches circled around a sphere. Am I too late? Countess Xiaoqiu sighed. The soul-cleansing tea tree was a chaotic saint-level tea tree with a violent character. She didn't expect that Bufang and the others would suddenly come to the tea garden. It seemed that Bufang was bound to die after being wrapped by the tea tree. Countess Xiaoqiu had no choice but to leave. Even she would have a headache if she was bound by the tea tree. Bufang was only a saint of the Great Path, so he was bound to die after being wrapped by the tea tree. Roar! The face on the trunk of the tea tree roared at Countess Xiaoqiu. Countess Xiaoqiu's face turned cold. Suddenly she paused. She looked at the tea tree ball that was wrapped by the face. A ripping sound rang out. The tea tree ball was torn apart. Chapter 17:14. Oh! The sphere formed by the tea tree's branches was torn apart. Almost at the same time, arms stretched out of the 2 tea tree spheres. One was a fair-skinned human arm, and the other was a metallic arm. The scarlet divine flame swirled, and the tea tree's branches and leaves immediately retreated. Bufang's figure slowly emerged from the tea tree. Xiao Bai, on the other hand, had a much simpler way. He simply tore the tea tree apart and jumped out of it. You actually managed to break free? Countess Xiaoqiu was a little stunned. She gave Bufang and Xiao Bai a puzzled look. Bufang's cultivation base was only at the level of a saint of the Great Path. How could he have broken free from the binding of a chaotic saint-level tea tree? This soul-cleansing tree was not simple. It was a supreme expert of a universe dominated by plant life forms. She, on the other hand, had dug it out alive, transplanted it under her house, and turned it into a tea garden. It was mainly because of the energy contained in the tea tree that she inexplicably liked. Was tea a delicacy? The Queen of Curses could not say for sure, but she was happy that the Queen did not give her any trouble. Bufang gave Countess Xiaoqiu an indifferent look and twitched the corner of his mouth. I've thought of the dish I'm going to cook, Bufang said slowly, standing on the tea leaf and looking at Countess Xiaoqiu. Countess Xiaoqiu gave Bufang a surprised look. How did this boy think of it so quickly? Was he just trying to brush her off? If he was, she wouldn't have told him the way to enter District B and District A. Otherwise, she wouldn't have easily told him the way to enter District A. Not only would she not tell Bufang, but she would also kill Bufang. She was not an easygoing person to begin with. In Void City, she was called the Demon Countess. In other universes, she was called the She-Fiend. Therefore, she was not an easy person to get along with. Then I'll look forward to your dish. As for this soul-cleansing tree, if you need it, I'll give it to you, Countess Xiaoqiu said. Bufang nodded in satisfaction. He liked this kind of person who could give up anything for the sake of eating. How could the soul-cleansing tea tree compare to delicacies? Countess Xiaoqiu left. He disappeared on the spot as if he had teleported. Bufang and Xiao Bai looked at each other, then turned around and looked at the soul-cleansing tea tree. Although Bufang was only a peak saint of the Great Path, his fighting prowess was comparable to that of a chaotic saint. Although the tea tree was the ruler of the universe, it was just an ingredient in front of Bufang. Buzz! A loud and clear dragon roar resounded. In the next instant, a dragon bone kitchen knife fell into Bufang's hand, shining with dazzling light. Then, the blade light descended, instantly flying toward the tea tree. Rumble! The entire Count mansion began to tremble. Countess Xiaoqiu returned to the mansion. She crossed her legs, sat down on a chair, and held a cup of water. Looking at the ripples in the water, she exhaled softly. Beneath the ground, Bufang and Xiaobai came out, covered in green mucus. In the end, Bufang obtained 3 resplendent tea leaves, which had mysterious patterns flowing on them. Just by looking at the patterns, one could tell that they were actually a kind of cultivation technique, a peerless cultivation technique that could allow one to cultivate to the level of a saint of the Great Path. Of course, in Bufang's eyes, they were just tea leaves. They were tea leaves that could be used to make tea eggs. Bufang put one of the 3 tea leaves into the heaven and earth farmland and asked Niu Hansan to hybridize it. As for the remaining 2, Bufang planned to use them to make tea eggs. Bufang could already imagine that these tea eggs would be the strongest tea eggs in all the universes. Since there were tea leaves, of course there had to be eggs. To match the tea leaves, he naturally needed a chaotic saint-level egg. Bufang narrowed his eyes. With the tea leaves in hand, he came to the Countess's living room. "It's done." Countess Xiaqiu sat calmly in a chair and drank the tea in a dignified manner. Bufang shook his head. "I need another egg. An egg of a chaotic saint-level divine beast." Bufang said. "Are you cooking? I can't believe you plan to use a chaotic saint-level egg. Are you crazy?" Countess Xiaqiu's expression became a little strange. She curled her red lips and said, "You chefs are all crazy creatures. Apart from me, there is only one other countess in District C who has a chaotic saint-level divine beast, Countess Adong. She has a divine pet, a chaotic divine phoenix who has just stepped into the level of a chaotic saint. It's a pity that my dark divine dragon is male and can't lay eggs. Otherwise, I wouldn't have recommended that bird to you." Countess Xiaqiu said. Bufang blinked. Xiaobai raised his huge palm and touched his head. Why did his tone sound so fake? Countess Adong leaves District C every 3 months to hunt in other universes with her divine phoenix. You can go to Countess Itong's mansion and steal the egg at that time. Countess Xiaqiu spoke excitedly as if she had planned this. Bufang was dumbfounded as he listened. She even made a plan for Bufang, telling him when to enter the mansion, when to steal the egg, and how to avoid the 2 flaming turkeys guarding the phoenix nest. For some reason, Bufang had a feeling that he had boarded a pirate ship. 3 days later, District C. A loud rumble rang out, and the sonorous cry of a phoenix soared into the sky. The entire sky of District C turned scarlet. Many nobles chuckled. Countess Adong has gone hunting with her divine pet again. I wonder which universe will suffer this time. In the sky, a woman dressed like a Valkyrie stepped on a flaming chariot. In front of her was a huge flaming phoenix the size of a star. The next moment she disappeared. Meanwhile, in Countess Xiaqiu's mansion, Bufang and Xiaobai began to form an array with their hands. Buzz, the array flickered. Bufang and Xiaobai disappeared in an instant. Countess Xiaqiu rubbed her hands. For some reason, she felt a little expectant. It would be great if she could eat the egg of her sworn enemy's divine pet. In the phoenix nest, it sat in a rift in the void arranged by Countess Itong's mansion. Xiaobai and Bufang teleported over. They were right on top of the rift. Bufang looked at the rift, which looked like a huge eyeball, and the corner of his mouth twitched. The aura bursting out of the rift was extremely terrifying. At the same time, Bufang sensed that 2 turkeys, who were peak saints of the Great Path, were staring at him. The eyes of the 2 turkeys were very big, like the sun, bursting with divine radiance. Didn't Countess Xiaqiu say that these turkeys are sleeping at this time? Bufang was speechless. He exchanged a glance with Xiaobai. Bufang took a deep breath. "Xiaobai, 1 for each of us. Make it quick. Pluck their feathers or skin them, it's up to you. As long as you're happy," Bufang said. The next moment, Bufang and Xiaobai immediately sped away. "How dare you? How dare you trespass the Count's mansion?" The 2 turkeys, 1 male and 1 female, spoke in human voices. The heavens and earth began to tremble. A terrifying rumble shook the entire district C in an instant. The guards of the Count's mansion moved in an instant. These guards were not weak, and it only took them about 3 breaths to arrive. In midair, Little Who sat on Xiaopi's back in a daze. Xiaopi's compound eyes drooped, and he was spitting bubbles as if he were about to fall asleep. Little Who raised his little paw and rubbed his nose. Then, he saw the densely packed group of guards approaching from afar. The guards of the Count's mansion were much more numerous than those of the nobles, and their strength and fighting prowess were much stronger. Little Who rose to his feet. Then, his belly bulged. The next moment, the fox's mouth suddenly widened. The heaven god's blood flowed through his body, turning him from a white fox to a blood fox. Boom! Little Who opened his mouth, and a vast amount of energy gathered in it. Ah! Da-da-da-da-da! In a flash, countless soul demon meatballs shot out of his mouth. It gushed towards the densely packed guards. The guards did not expect that these people who trespassed the Count's mansion would be so bold. They could not believe that they would openly spit on them in front of the Count's mansion. Boom! Boom! Explosions broke out in an instant. In a flash, the whole Count's mansion was enveloped in flames. "Do it," Bufang said to Xiao Bai. Then, the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared, the black turtle constellation walk on his back, the white tiger stove under his feet, and the Qilin transmigration ladle in his hand. The law of space, the law of transmigration, and the law of time, the 5 supreme laws of the universe circulated in an instant, pushing Bufang's fighting prowess to the extreme. Cluck! In the blink of an eye, Bufang was fighting with the turkey. Xiao Bai threw down his flag and rushed toward the turkey. In just a flash, Xiao Bai was pecked by the turkey, who was as huge as a mountain. He covered his round head and ran back. The battle broke out too suddenly. The whole District C was boiling. Boom! The black turtle constellation walk spun as Bufang carried it. Yin and yang energy circulated, and his strength reached the peak. He swung the wok and smashed it on the turkey's head. With a loud bang, the fire boss was hit so hard that he felt dizzy and fell to the ground. Bufang's eyes focused. The law of time circulated, turned into chains, and fell down, tightly binding the turkey. Bufang glanced at Xiao Bai, who was being chased by the turkey. Without hesitation, his mind flickered, and he turned into a beam of light, rushing into the fissure. Inside the fissure was the phoenix nest. Bufang sped through the phoenix nest. Soon, he saw many divine phoenix eggs in the center of the nest. Seeing so many divine phoenix eggs, Bufang was a little dumbfounded. He didn't expect to get such a pleasant surprise from taking out a divine phoenix egg. However, although there were many divine phoenix eggs, not many could survive. Divine phoenixes were rare to begin with. Most of the phoenix eggs in this phoenix nest were dead eggs. Bufang didn't choose the kind that could survive. With the vermilion bird around, Bufang chose a dead egg. Although it was a dead egg, it could not hatch into a phoenix. Because of the vermilion bird, Bufang could make a precise judgment. That was why he chose this egg. However, the essence energy of this egg was so majestic, as though it wanted to break through the eggshell and cover the sky. Holding this phoenix egg, Bufang didn't linger. He turned and dashed out of the phoenix nest. Boom! The moment Bufang dashed out of the void fissure, the turkey, who was bound by the law of time's chains, struggled crazily. "Xiao Bai! Retreat!" Bufang shouted at Xiao Bai. Rumble! The sky changed dramatically. A dreadful rumble resounded. The void cracked open, and the cry of the phoenix was loud and ear-piercing. The sound of the chariot's wheels rolling through the void echoed between heaven and earth. "Bugs from District D! How dare you steal this Count's divine phoenix egg? You're courting death!" A cold female voice rang out. Then, a huge sword of judgment fell from the sky, slashing toward Bufang and Xiao Bai. This countess was very strong, a chaotic saint-level existence. She was not as strong as Countess Xiaqiu. But for Bufang, she was a great challenge. Bufang focused his eyes. He held the egg in one hand and raised the other. With the black turtle constellation walk in front of him and the 5 supreme laws of the universe wrapped around it, he resisted the sword. Boom! Half of the Count's mansion was turned into ruins in a flash. Bufang formed an array with his hand, and specks of light filled the air. "Xiao Bai, hurry up!" Bufang shouted. Little Hu burped as Xiaopi, who had turned into a beam of golden light, rushed into the array. In the distance, Little White flew over, and its fan-like hands grabbed a turkey's head. It carried the huge turkey whose feathers had been plucked away and charged into the array formation. Bufang was speechless. However, it was too late for Bufang to say anything now. The divine phoenix's roar had already descended. A countess and a divine phoenix. The attack of 2 chaotic saint-level existences. Even Bufang did not dare to face them head-on. All of a sudden, in Countess Xiaoqiu's mansion, a faint chuckle resounded. A black spear shot out of the mansion, pointing straight at the 2 chaotic saint-level existences in the sky. Boom! Taking advantage of this, Bufang slipped into the array and disappeared. "Xiaoqiu, are you going to fight me?" An angry female voice screamed, causing the void to tremble. "However, my hands slipped when I was practicing the spear," Countess Xiaoqiu said. After that, the whole Countess Xiaoqiu's residence fell into complete silence, no matter how Countess Adong roared. It was as if she was not the one who threw the spear just now. At this moment, in Countess Xiaoqiu's mansion, in the underground space, Bufang emerged with a phoenix egg in his arms. Xiao Bai, on the other hand, appeared with a turkey in his hand. His mechanical eyes flashed as if he was excited. Little Hu burped, his big eyes shining as if he had something to eat again. Countess Xiaoqiu rubbed her hands and looked at Bufang, who had succeeded in stealing the egg. This time, the tea egg is finally safe. The egg-stealing alliance had cooperated perfectly. Holding the egg, Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth slightly. "You must make the tea egg quickly. This space can't be hidden for long. Countess Adong has reported this to the Queen of Curses, and she will soon discover this place. At that time, I won't be able to hide it anymore unless you cook the egg," Countess Xiaoqiu said. Bufang just rolled his eyes at her. "Don't worry. By the time the Queen of Curses finds out, there will only be eggshells left." Chapter 17-15. It was an egg shrouded in a powerful aura. The center of the egg seemed to be bursting with light. Bufang held the egg and patted it. Countess Xiaoqiu had withstood Countess Aitong's anger for him, which had saved him a lot of trouble. Naturally, Countess Adong did not dare to fight Countess Xiaoqiu. In Void City, Countess Xiaoqiu was not weak. Countess Adong wasn't stupid enough to start a war with a countess over an egg. After Countess Adong asked the Divine Phoenix to examine the egg, she breathed a sigh of relief. What the other party had snatched was just a dead egg. If it were an egg that could be hatched, Countess Adong would have snatched it back no matter what. However, it was just a dead egg. Although it was also precious, Countess Adong had a lot of dead eggs. Therefore, she did not pay much attention to it. Inside Countess Xiaoqiu's residence, Bufang came to the courtyard with the egg in his hands. Around him, many servants turned their eyes to Bufang. That was a divine phoenix egg. They wondered what this fellow was going to do with it. Countess Xiaoqiu did not let too many people pay attention to Bufang. She asked everyone to leave the courtyard, while she looked at Bufang expectantly. She did not look forward to cooking. She just wanted to feel the feeling that the old man had been looking for. However, when she saw the divine phoenix egg, her interest was piqued. Bufang did not pay attention to the others. He washed his hands and was ready to cook the tea egg. He was making a dish with the tea leaves grown from a chaotic saint-level tea tree and the egg of a chaotic saint-level divine beast. It was probably the most luxurious dish Bufang had ever cooked. Although it was just a tea egg, the black turtle constellation wok was filled with water that was full of life energy. Buzz, the divine flame jumped out and quickly went under the wok. A scorching heat burst out, causing the temperature of the wok to rise in an instant. The hot water in the wok was boiling. After Bufang cleaned the divine phoenix egg, he placed it into the black turtle constellation wok. The hot water rippled, and the ripples kept hitting the eggshell, acting on the ingredients inside. Under the effect of the boiling water, the entire egg seemed to be spinning. Bufang's starry sky spiritual force suddenly spread out and enveloped the entire egg. He could see that everything in the egg was slowly solidifying. Cook the eggs in high heat. The hot water kept boiling. When the texture of the egg had solidified, Bufang turned down the divine flame. 1, 2, 3. Under Bufang's control, the red fiery lotus, which was originally rotating like a lotus, turned into a single flower. A small lotus slowly rotated, slowly burning the black turtle constellation wok. During this process, not the slightest hint of egg fragrance flowed out. The process was actually tedious and uninteresting. However, after the egg was cooked, Lin Fan's eyes lit up. Bufang dispersed the fire, cleared the water, and washed the divine phoenix egg with cold water. Finally, regardless of the scorching eggshell, he reached out his hand. Bufang's hand was not covered with divine power, so he directly grabbed the egg. Countess Xiaqiu was a little puzzled. Crack. Enduring the high temperature, Bufang grabbed the egg. With a sudden force, the eggshell on the surface of the egg cracked. A waft of egg aroma wafted out, assailing Bufang and all the people present. The egg fragrance must be extraordinary, and Bufang's cooking technique was even more extraordinary. Is it done? Countess Xiaqiu was slightly stunned. It doesn't seem to be difficult at all. She couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. If the egg was like this, she would rather not eat it. Is it done? Of course not. Bufang once again poured the spring of life into the black turtle constellation wok, and this time, he added many divine herbs. Countess Xiaqiu's eyes narrowed as she looked at the divine herbs Bufang took out. These divine herbs were extraordinary. Many of them were ingredients of some of the top pills in Void City. When these herbs were added directly into the wok, their essence spread under Bufang's control and moistened the wok. However, these divine herbs were only auxiliary ingredient. The main ingredient was the essence of the chaotic saint-level soul cleansing tea tree. Of the 3 leaves, Bufang gave one to Nyo Han-san and asked him to hybridize it. He planned to use the remaining 2 to make the tea egg. After folding the leaves, Bufang cut them in half with the knife. After that, he used a clean wok to stir-fry the leaves. After Bufang's stir-frying, the 2 leaves were still green and crisp, but a strong aroma of tea had spread from them. This aroma was the key. After stir-frying the tea leaves, Bufang put them into the black turtle constellation wok. A dreamy aroma spread, and a faint light wrapped the surface of the tea. The egg floated in it. The color of the soup also changed. Before, it was still a normal transparent color, but after adding a lot of ingredients, the color of the soup completely changed. It had turned auburn. The tea egg rolled in it, and the part where Bufang had crushed it was absorbing the soup hungrily. As the soup soaked into the egg, which was white and glittering with divine light, began to dim. It was as if its divine light had been erased. It was like a swan's egg had turned into an ugly duckling's egg. Bufang controlled the divine flame again, causing its temperature to rise. Soon, the scorching heat completely enveloped the tea egg. A whirlpool emerged in the black turtle constellation wok. The egg was no longer in the whirlpool. However, as it spun, the egg gradually emerged from the center of the whirlpool. The reddish-brown soup was flowing like the waves of the vast ocean. A vast amount of spiritual energy began to pour into the egg. The tea egg was about to take shape. At this moment, Countess Xiaqiu's eyes lit up. She was looking forward to eating this tea egg, but she didn't want to be targeted by the Queen of Curses because of it. Buzz, Countess Xiaqiu performed a hand seal. Then a spinning array soared into the sky. It was a magic array that could isolate the Queen of Curses from probing. This kind of magic array was extremely precious, but Countess Xiaqiu used it here. Just to have a bite of the egg. Rumble. The magic array spread and enveloped the whole mansion in a flash. It was as if a golden bowl had been poured upside down, covering the whole restaurant. During this period, no aura could leak out, and all probing of wills was isolated. Bufang didn't pay much attention to it. All his attention was on the tea egg. It was not that easy to make a tea egg. Bufang sat cross-legged opposite the black turtle constellation Hua. His mental force was surging on his forehead, constantly sweeping out. Rumble. Rumble. Bufang's mind was suffering from a violent impact. The tea egg was spinning. Very quickly, divine patterns finally appeared on it. Those divine patterns continued to cover it. 1, 2, 3. Before long, 9 divine runes emerged on the egg. These 9 divine patterns seemed to have condensed all the energy in the universe, causing the herbal tea egg to rise to a higher level. They were so dazzling that the ordinary tea egg became extraordinary. Chaotic energy filled the air. The chaotic energy was an aura that only chaotic saints could produce. Bufang sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes. He closed his eyes, and there seemed to be boundless energy flowing in his spirit sea. Golden light gathered, and a wisp of chaotic energy slowly grew in his mind. At last, Bufang opened his eyes. The system's solemn and serious voice resounded in his mind. Congratulations to the host for completing a God of Cooking's menu dish. You have gained a wisp of chaotic energy. It was the long-lost system's voice. It was no longer as serious as before, but it made Bufang feel a sense of familiarity and comfort. The appearance of the chaotic energy had changed Bufang completely. Although this wisp of chaotic energy did not make him step into the chaotic saint realm from the saint of the great path, it brought Bufang one step closer to becoming a chaotic saint. The modern heaven gods were all chaotic saints, and Bufang was getting closer and closer to this level. The better the food he cooked, the more chaotic energy he could obtain. This was undoubtedly good news for Bufang. As long as the dishes he cooked were of a higher grade, his cultivation base would continue to rise. However, at Bufang's current level, it was very difficult to cook a higher grade dish. Rumble. The change in Bufang naturally attracted Countess Xiaqiu's attention. She had never heard that cooking could improve one's cultivation base. The tea egg was done. The water in the wok was boiled dry. Only an egg was left, floating in the center of the wok. All that was left in the wok were the dregs of the divine herbs. This egg had condensed countless essences. It contained the energy of the divine egg and the essence of countless divine herbs. It was absolutely extraordinary. More importantly, an elegant aroma of tea, mixed with the aroma of the egg, filled the air, making it irresistible. Countess Xiaqiu was naturally familiar with this aroma because she drank it every day. However, when the aroma of tea and egg combined, she had never smelled it before, so she was quite curious. Rumble. Oh! Countess Xiaqiu's pupils constricted slightly. The formation of the tea egg triggered an unusual phenomenon of heaven and earth. Even in Void City, there seemed to be lightning bolts emerging. However, the moment these primitive disasters of heaven and earth emerged, Countess Xiaqiu's expression changed. If these fluctuations attracted the Queen of Curses' attention, everything would be over. She did not know if it was because of the array. These tribulations came and went quickly. Just when Countess Xiaqiu was shocked, the thunder punishment suddenly disappeared. Bufang, sitting cross-legged in the center, slowly opened his eyes. At that moment, there seemed to be chaotic energy swirling in his eyes. The chaotic energy startled Countess Xiaqiu. Bufang stood up and walked into the black pot. He took out the herbal tea egg. The tea egg was boiling hot, but Bufang didn't care. Carefully, he used his hands to peel off the eggshell, which was the size of a football. In the distance, The huge turkey that had been pressed to the ground by Xiao Bai had already been clucking. A divine phoenix egg had been cooked? The turkey was frightened. However, Xiao Bai's fan-like palm pressed down on the turkey, making it impossible for the turkey to move. The eggshell peeled off. The crystal-clear broth slid down from the soft jade-like egg whites. It was full of elasticity. With a light flick, it swayed from side to side. Bufang grabbed the dragon bone kitchen knife. The glint of the blade fiercely descended and cut the herbal tea egg into 3 pieces. The reddish-brown egg white and the egg yolk that was covered with a layer of gray luster, a majestic aroma of eggs and tea wafted through the air. It really tickled the taste buds. Bufang took out a blue and white porcelain plate. He placed the 3 sliced herbal tea eggs on the plate. The side of the plate was decorated with 2 or 3 green tea leaves that still had water droplets on them. Bufang turned and nodded at Countess Xiaqiu in the distance. "The 9-mark chaos herbal tea egg is done," Bufang said faintly. Rumble, as the dish was completed, a frightening aura descended. Countess Xiaqiu flashed and landed next to Bufang, her eyes full of solemnity. She seemed to be listening attentively. Bufang frowned. Inside the array, they were all a little nervous at the moment. What were they nervous about? Of course, they were nervous about the Queen of Curses. Time ticked by. Finally, Countess Xiaqiu exhaled. The Queen of Curses did not respond. It seemed that the array had fooled her. Countess Xiaqiu's heart skipped a beat. Then, her eyes fell curiously and eagerly on the herbal tea egg in Bufang's hand. Chapter 17-16. 9-striped chaos tea egg. Bufang's words lingered in Countess Xiaqiu's ears. Little Hu jumped out of Xiao Bai's arms and landed on Bufang's shoulder. His eyes were wide and his mouth was drooling as he stared at the tea egg in Bufang's hand. The aroma of egg and tea had made Little Hu restless. This must be very delicious. Little Hu was very sure. Isn't this just an ordinary egg? Countess Xiaqiu looked at the egg in Bufang's hand. The simple egg made her frown. According to the old man, food was a very mysterious thing, but now it seemed that there was nothing mysterious about it. However, it did smell good. An ordinary egg? No. It's not ordinary. Bufang shook his head. The eggs he had handled were never ordinary. While the array still existed, Countess Xiaqiu reached out and took a piece of egg. The egg was cut into 3 pieces by Bufang like a watermelon. Countess Xiaqiu took a piece. The surface of the egg was very smooth, and the aroma of egg and tea lingered in the air, causing her heart to tremble slightly. For some reason, Countess Xiaqiu felt as if she was salivating. Without hesitation, Bufang grabbed an egg. Little Hu, on the other hand, held an egg in his hands. His little eyes narrowed into crescents. It was very happy to have something to eat. Countess Xiaqiu glanced at Bufang. The latter did not say anything, so she took a bite. The egg white had turned reddish-brown, probably because it had been soaked in the broth. As for the yolk, it was wrapped in a layer of gray, but the deeper it went, the more golden it became. Countess Xiaqiu grabbed the piece of egg, opened her mouth, and put it in. Ah! She took a gentle bite. It didn't feel very hard. She bit down and directly broke the egg open. The yolk spread out and seeped into her mouth. Once it entered the mouth, the yolk showed a kind of dry and astringent feeling. However, the softness and smoothness of the egg whites made Countess Xiaqiu's eyes widen. Gulp! It seemed that the saliva had warmed the tea egg. Swallowing it in one gulp, he felt as if his throat was being frosted. As soon as the herbal tea egg entered his stomach, a majestic energy burst out instantly. The aroma of tea and egg blended almost perfectly, making Countess Xiaqiu unable to control herself for a moment. He couldn't help but take another bite. This smell. Countess Xiaqiu did not know how many years it had been since she last ate. Her almost degenerated taste buds made her feel a long-lost nostalgia. Rumble! Countess Xiaqiu felt the chaotic energy in her boil as soon as she swallowed the egg. This egg was actually able to draw out the chaos chi in his body? That was not all. Countess Xiaqiu felt that the chaotic energy in her was growing and condensing out of thin air. Unbelievable! In order to become a chaotic saint, chaotic energy was indispensable. Only this kind of energy could allow one to unleash great power. The quantity of chaotic energy determined the strength of a chaotic saint. The more powerful a chaotic saint was, the stronger his chaotic energy would be. Generally speaking, it would take a chaotic saint tens of thousands of years to condense a wisp of chaotic energy. Of course, in some cases, he could condense more, but the probability was very small. At this moment, however, Countess Xiaqiu felt that her common sense had been overturned. Just a bite of the herbal tea egg had made her produce a wisp of chaotic energy. As a countess, she had an astonishing 100 wisps of chaotic energy. Once she exerted her strength, she could destroy heaven and earth and shake the universe. However, even shaking the universe was not as shocking as she was at this moment. This is the basic operation of gourmet food. Bufang glanced at Countess Xiaqiu, who was making a fuss about nothing, and said lightly. Bufang also took a bite of the herbal tea egg. He closed his eyes and felt the flow of energy in his body. The herbal tea egg did not provide Bufang with chaotic energy because Bufang could not rely on it to improve his cultivation base. According to Bufang's understanding of the system, he had to cook. If he wanted to improve his cultivation base, he had to cook. Only when he cooked a dish and the dish reached a certain level could he improve his cultivation base. Cultivation? Bufang did not need to cultivate. It was impossible for him to cultivate, not in this life. He could improve his cultivation base as long as he cooked. Of course, at Bufang's level, cooking was not as easy as cultivating. The fragrance of the tea was very soft, and it had a feeling of baptism to one's soul. As long as it tasted of the egg. Perhaps it depended on the ingredient. This egg was the most delicious egg that Bufang had ever eaten. The first bite was ecstasy, the second was enchantment, and the third was euphoria. Countess Xiaqiu closed her eyes, her long eyelashes fluttering slightly. She stuffed all the herbal tea egg into her mouth. Her sexy red lips were still stained with egg yolk. She stuck out her rosy little tongue and licked the yolk around it. The moistness left by her saliva rubbing against her skin was extremely tempting. Countess Xiaqiu's chest heaved violently. She frowned slightly, clenched her fists, and bent her lower body slightly. Then, she felt a stream of heat spread through her body in an instant. Oh! Countess Xiaqiu could not help but let out a cry. At that moment, she felt as if she was facing the origin of the universe, which emitted a scorching heat and stimulated every inch of her skin. The scene in front of her changed. Countless memories that had been sealed in her mind were dug out. The effect of the soul-cleansing tea seemed to be fully manifested at this moment. The corners of Countess Xiaqiu's eyes were wet. Immersed in her memories, her face flushed and her eyes filled with tears. Bufang ate the herbal tea egg while looking at Countess Xiaqiu. The latter's state surprised him a little. Is her resistance to delicious food so low? Bufang was slightly surprised, but on second thought it seemed to be normal. Because of the Queen of Curses, Void City had banned chefs, so there had been no delicious food for a long time. Therefore, these people had no idea how good food was. Countess Xiaqiu was the first person who dared to break the Queen's rule. She was also the first person to feel the charm of delicious food. This 9 stripes chaotic herbal tea egg has another name. It's called the overwhelming sadness egg. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth and said. In the distance, Foxy's mouth was wide open as she sat on Whitey's shoulder and smacked her lips. Then, he stuffed the whole egg into his mouth. She slurped down the food happily. His white fur was even stained with the yolk of the egg. The little fellow was very happy, and his little eyes narrowed into slits. Suddenly Little Who shuddered, then covered his mouth with his little paw. His big eyes widened and became moist with tears. She climbed up Little White's body, and as she climbed up, she staggered left and right as if she was drunk. Xiao Bai seemed to dislike his slow climbing. His huge palm fell, grabbed the little fellow's tail, lifted him up, and put him on his head. Xiaopi glanced at Little Hu, whose eyes were hazy with tears. The bubble he spat out burst with a pop. It seems that the power of the overwhelming sadness egg is great. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth slightly as he looked at Little Hu's drunken appearance. There was no wine in the tea egg, but it was still intoxicating. In fact, it was not the wine that intoxicated people, but the story. Because the tea egg could bring out people's most primitive memories and sad emotions, Countess Xiaqiu staggered, her face flushed, and she panted violently. She staggered a few steps, her slender legs slightly bent, and she sat on the ground. Her legs were crossed, and her eyes were misty. She said she wanted to feel the old man's fascination and love for food. She wanted Bufang's dishes to make her feel that way. In fact, she did not think that Bufang could make her heart, which had been sealed for so long and had never known how to cry, feel that kind of feeling. But, in reality, she felt it. A figure seemed to emerge in front of her eyes. It was a handsome man with a bright smile on his face. Wearing a chef's robe, he waved his kitchen knife, turned, and stepped into the flowering shrubs. He seemed to be pursuing his great way of cooking. Before she knew it, tears streaked down her cheeks. Countess Xiaqiu had long lost her grace. Like a little girl who had lost her doll, her face was covered with tears. She looked pitiful when she saw her. Anyone who had tender feelings for the fairer sex could not help but be tempted. Unfortunately, the one standing opposite her was Bufang. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up. He put his hands behind his back, very satisfied with Countess Xiaqiu's appearance. A diner's expression and emotion could best reflect a chef's evaluation of a dish. "Do you feel it? Are you satisfied?" Bufang said lightly. His voice pulled Countess Xiaqiu out of her reverie. Countess Xiaqiu's face froze. "No wonder Her Majesty wants to kill you chefs. You're all scourges. We're all enemies." Countess Xiaqiu wiped the tears from her eyes. Countess Xiaqiu wiped away the tears in her eyes. Just now, she almost wanted to kill him. It was just an egg, but it had seduced her mind. This kind of chef was really scary. She was a chaotic saint, the Countess of Void City. However, the feeling in her memory and the man's love for food made her give up her desire to kill Bufang. How could she blame the chef? A chef was only responsible for cooking food. What really made her sad was actually the story that was triggered by the delicacies. Food was an original sin, but the human heart was the root. "I may have some understanding of his pursuit of food," Countess Xiaqiu said with emotion. Bufang nodded. "You have a point." Looking at Countess Xiaqiu, Bufang asked seriously, "Now, can you tell me how to get into District B?" Countess Xiaqiu wiped the sweat from her forehead. She glanced at Bufang, raised her hand, and dispelled the array. "The cursed goddess is in District A. There is more than one cursed goddess and more than one candidate there. Although it is very difficult for people from District C to enter District B under normal circumstances, it is not impossible." Looking at Bufang, Countess Xiaqiu stuck out her tongue and licked her lip. She was still savoring the taste of the tea egg. She seemed to be a little infatuated with the taste. Bufang looked at Countess Xiaqiu and motioned for her to continue. Void City is, in fact, an indestructible divine kingdom. The people in each district are almost immortal. However, the Queen of Curses will renew the population of the districts every 100,000 years. At that time, people will be able to enter District B from District C. However, it will take about 30,000 years for the next population renewal. I don't think you can afford to wait that long. So, there is only one way. Countess Xiaqiu glanced at Bufang with bright eyes. "What is it?" Bufang frowned. "It's a simple way. Countess Xiaqiu seemed to be interested. She smiled and said, "It's simple and crude. Fight your way in." Chapter 17:17. Fight your way in. Countess Xiaqiu's words made Bufang a little speechless. He did not expect that it would be such an unreliable suggestion. Fight my way in. If I had known earlier, Bufang would not have had to go through so much trouble in the first place. Why did I have to cook a tea egg to conquer her? Bufang chose to fight his way in. He had eaten a tea egg for nothing. Although Bufang was a chef, he had a fiery heart. Bufang had been fighting ever since he made his debut, and he had never stopped. No, it's not that easy to fight my way in. Countess Xiaqiu seemed to have guessed what Bufang was thinking. She raised a slender finger and wagged it. It's not that easy for you to fight your way into District B from District C. First of all, you have to be qualified to fight your way in, and I can provide that for you. Countess Xiaqiu said. Bufang nodded to show that he was still listening. You should know the fighting pit, right? That's the entrance to District B. Countess Xiaqiu said. Void City is very big, and it's divided into 4 districts, A, B, C, and D. Let's not talk about District D because there's nothing special about that place. But District A, B, and C are different. These 3 districts are all prosperous districts. Although they are similar, there are also differences. Although they are all under the jurisdiction of the Empress, she usually does not show her face. After all, she is a high and mighty figure. So, they rule according to the rank of nobility. District A is governed by dukes. You saw the noblewoman next to the cursed goddess earlier. She is one of the 3 dukes of District A. She is also one of the supporters of the cursed goddess you are looking for, Duchess Yunlan. Further down is District B. The people in District B are marquises, and there are also 3 marquises. District C is the count. I don't need to explain that. You should know, Countess Xiaqiu said. Oh? What does this have to do with fighting my way in? Bufang asked in confusion. Although the Queen of Curses renews her population every 100,000 years, although Void City looks peaceful, the competition in the mainland is surging. Every year, there will be a competition between the candidates for the title of nobility in District A. Those who lose will be demoted to a lower-class district, while those who win will be promoted to a higher-class district, Bufang said. You are currently in District C. I can give you the qualifications to participate in the competition for the title of nobility. As for whether or not you can make it, that will depend on your own luck. Countess Xiaqiu said with a smile. The rules were not complicated. Bufang quickly understood that it was the same principle as natural selection. There were nobles in every district, and the nobles competed for the title of nobility in every district. If Bufang wanted to enter District B, he would have to fight for the title of nobility. Alright, that's the end of our conversation. I'll settle the issue of the title for you. Tomorrow morning, go to the ring fighting arena in District C and wait. Countess Xiaqiu's face turned cold, and she didn't want to say too much. With a wave of his hand, his figure disappeared. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly as he watched the Countess disappear. He had a feeling that this woman was a little unreliable. Countess Xiaqiu disappeared. Bufang turned to look at Xiao Bai and the others. Little Hu lay on Xiao Bai's head with a silly smile on his face. As for Xiaopi, he was still spitting bubbles like a Buddha. As for Xiao Bai, his mechanical eyes flashed. He raised his huge palm and pointed inquiringly at the turkey he had pressed to the ground. The chicken was shivering in fear at the moment. Xiao Bai, do you want to eat the chicken? Bufang was slightly taken aback. Xiao Bai raised his hand and scratched the back of his head. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. The law of time spread, sealed the turkey's body, and threw it into the heaven and earth farmland. Niu Han-san should be very interested in this chicken. in the depths of Countess Xiaoqiu's residence. At this moment, Countess Xiaoqiu's heart was pounding. The feeling made her tremble all over as if a fear came from the depths of her bloodline. Her slender legs moved quickly, and finally, she came to the great hall. In the great hall, all the servants and maids remained motionless, as if time had stopped. In the main seat of the countess in the hall, there was a woman dressed in a plain veil with her back facing her. Countess Xiaoqiu shuddered when she saw the figure. With a thud, Countess Xiaoqiu fell to her knees. "My queen," the woman did not look back, but the invisible pressure she exuded made Countess Xiaoqiu tremble all over. "It's over," she thought she could hide it from the queen, but it turned out that she could not. The queen was not someone she dared to deceive. Countess Xiaoqiu felt as if she was only one step away from death. The plain-veiled woman looked ordinary. There were no energy fluctuations coming from her body, nor were there any chaotic aura fluctuations. She was so plain that she looked like an ordinary person who had never cultivated in an ordinary continent in a small world. But in fact, she was the Queen of Curses, the supreme existence who ruled over Void City. She was a terrible existence who could destroy half of the starry sky with a flick of her sleeve. "Is it delicious?" she asked. Her voice was as gentle as jade, like pearls falling on a jade plate, or like a bashful, half-covered face. "My queen." Countess Xiaoqiu's pupils constricted. "You only need to answer me. Is it delicious or not delicious?" she said. Her voice was full of majesty. "It's delicious." Countess Xiaoqiu's expression was somewhat conflicted. However, she stubbornly did not regret it. It was the first time she had tasted delicious food, but she felt emotions she had never felt before. It made her understand that man's lifelong pursuit. So, she had no regret. You shouldn't have eaten it. Delicious food is something more terrible than curses. It will bring you closer to destruction step by step. There was no emotion in the queen's voice. "Of all the countesses, you are the only one who is a cursed goddess. In fact, you are very similar to me, but you are very lucky." The Queen of Curses figure became blurry. Countess Xiaoqiu felt a sense of suffocation closing in on her. She could not help but gasp for breath. Her pupils constricted. It was as if an invisible hand had brushed across her face. The cold touch made her feel as if she had fallen into an ice cave. At that moment, her mind went completely blank. The taste of delicious food, the sorrow that the tea-egg brought her, all of them were completely sealed in the depths of her heart at this moment. Countess Xiaoqiu, who had regained some of her humanity because of the delicious food, regained her indifference. "That's right. The emotion of delicious food will corrode your heart and leave your body and mind riddled with holes." Countess Xiaoqiu's hair fluttered as if an invisible hand was combing through it. "Continue with your plan. Let him participate in the competition for the title. I'm looking forward to the moment when he stands in front of me. I've been looking forward to it for a long time." A faint voice lingered in Countess Xiaoqiu's ears. She looked up, her face expressionless. "Yes, Your Majesty." Countess Xiaoqiu bowed respectfully to the void. As for the woman in the void, she had already disappeared. Everything went on as usual, as if nothing had happened. The servants could move again. They did not feel anything at all and continued to do what they were supposed to do. That night Bu Fang received a token sent by Countess Xiaoqiu's servant. The word Viscount was engraved on it. This must be the token of qualification that Countess Xiaoqiu mentioned. Only by possessing this qualification token would one be able to step into the ring-shaped arena. It was made of an unknown metal. It was cold and heavy, and it felt as heavy as a mountain in his hand. This should be a token made of a star core, Bu Fang thought to himself. As expected of Void City, it's rich and overbearing. A star core that can be made into a token is definitely not an ordinary star core. When Bu Fang held it in his hand, he felt that the flow of energy between heaven and earth had become much faster. It was indeed a divine artifact that could help one's cultivation. No wonder the overall strength of the nobles in Void City was much stronger than that of the common people. Furthermore, the token also contained a strong curse power. It was as if it contained some divine power. Unfortunately, it was impossible for Bufang to cultivate. He would never do so in this lifetime, so it was a pity that he had lost this token. The night was long. Bufang entered the heaven and earth farmland. The spiritual energy in the farmland today was extremely rich, and it was not weaker than the cultivation environment of the divine dynasty. The cultivation bases of his apprentices had skyrocketed. However, this was not the focus of Bufang's attention. Bufang went to find Nyo Han-san. The fellow was crossbreeding the leaves of the soul-cleansing tea tree with the leaves of the 9-revolution Great Path tea tree. After talking with him for a while, he left the heaven and earth farmland. In terms of crossbreeding, Bufang was not as good as Nyo Han-san. If heaven did not give birth to Nyo Han-san, crossbreeding would be like a long night. Well, it was a quiet night. The next day, the sky was clear. Bufang left the Count Mansion with Xiao Bai, Little Hu, and the others. Bufang did not see Countess Xiaqiu. Bufang had no regrets about this. They walked through District C. The whole district was huge. It was not much smaller than a divine dynasty. There were teleportation arrays everywhere in the district. The popularization of these arrays made transportation in the district very convenient. Of course, there were also all kinds of mysterious chariot. These chariots were also a means of transportation, but they were much slower than arrays. The location was marked on the token. Bufang soon arrived at the fighting pit. It was different from the fighting pit in District D. The fighting pit here was gorgeously decorated, extremely lively and noisy. Rumble, the towering steel gate sealed off the fighting pit and the district. Bufang, who held the token, was also a noble. Bufang did not expect this. Bufang came to the steel gate. With a thought in his mind, the Viscount's token immediately floated up and soared into the sky. Rumble Bufang felt a powerful pressure bearing down on him. He narrowed his eyes slightly. He discovered that there was a figure sitting on top of the steel door. It was a formidable figure with an incomparably powerful aura. Bufang's heart skipped a beat. The other party was a chaotic saint, and not an ordinary one. The chaotic energy he possessed was not weaker than that of Countess Xiaqiu. The man raised his hand. A powerful suction sucked the token into his hand. He sized it up. The man's sharp eyes fell on Bufang. Enter the fighting pit and keep order. The man seemed to be doing a routine job. Anyone with a token could enter directly. Creak, creak, the cold steel gate opened to both sides with a rumble, and a mighty aura burst out from inside. Bufang stepped into it with Xiao Bai, Xiaopi, and Little Hu. He stepped in. In an instant, his field of vision widened, and a deafening whistle soared into the sky. Chapter 17-18. The most important thing was that his first opponent was the 198th place. How arrogant! Buzz, rumble, it was as if his duty was to guide Bufang to this room. Finally Bufang appeared. Rumble. Bufang didn't care much about the guard's departure. Bufang was very satisfied. In the end, it would turn into a hand-to-hand fight with Xiao Bai. He held the spear, and the flag fluttered behind him. The atmosphere was harmonious. Soon, the figure appeared. Xiao Bai had beaten a saint of the Great Path until he admitted defeat. However, this was a very normal situation. He sat on the ground and placed a plate of washed fruits on the table. He ate them while looking at them with relish. When his vision cleared, Bufang found that he was on a huge and vast planet. Bufang said, "The one who ranked first was a powerful saint of the Great Path, who had won 40 consecutive victories. Before he knew it, the rumor about the clothes-stripping demon Iron Puppet had gradually spread. 1 match, 2 matches, 3 matches, 4 matches. The guards didn't talk much, and their auras were not weak. They seemed to be well-trained experts. There were 2 camps in District C and District B. Bu Fong found that there was a 1 in his victory list. The 2 of them seemed to have been teleported to a planet and were fighting there. These people were all nobles from District C. "Your Excellency, this way, please," the guard said respectfully. This was a dilapidated and deathly silent star. There was no life on this star, so it was a good choice as a battlefield. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. The young man sneered for a while, then he was too lazy to say anything. He clenched his fist and threw a punch at Bu Fong. He rushed over and fought with his opponent. Bu Fong's victory list kept rising. The terrible curse power spread. The battle was over. Then, Xiao Bai rushed out with the spear and fought with the young man. However, it was also fair. Bu Fong drank the wine in his cup in one gulp, his expression incomparably calm. In the distance, a figure appeared on the star. In the formation, the battle that was taking place in the middle of the ring-shaped fighting field appeared. It wasn't that easy to achieve consecutive victories. The young man with a swollen face stared at Bu Fong's disappearing figure. "I'm a noble under Marquis Chi Mei of District B. I'm ranked 198, and I've won 7 consecutive victories. How is your honor? Tell me your name." In the scene, the slaughter was very bloody. It was a battle between 2 saints of the Great Path. He was even in the mood to laugh. After the guard finished speaking, he left the room and closed the door. In the next instant, Bu Fong felt a majestic voice resounding in his mind. That opponent was stripped naked by Xiao Bai, and he admitted defeat in disgrace. The bodies of Bu Fong, Xiao Bai, Xiao Opi, and Little Hu were all teleported away. The floor of the room was actually an independent teleportation array. The ranking was a little too high. Not only could they get the Queen's reward, but they could also get great honor. This was the reason why they kept choosing to fight. Bu Fong nodded and followed the guard. Rumble. When his opponent appeared, Bu Fong didn't argue with him. Instead, he asked Xiao Bai to fight. There was also a gap between the level of saints of the Great Path in District C and District B. He was used to using the curse power, so he was at a disadvantage in this kind of hand-to-hand combat. On the other side was the heir to the title of nobility in District B, Little, who jumped off Xiao Bai's shoulder and landed on the ground. After running for some distance, he stood still. The scene changed again. Bu Fong shook his head, stretched out a finger, and waved it. "So, you're my opponent this time?" The young man's face turned red. However, as the battle went on, he became more and more frightened. On the other side was the heir to the title of nobility in District C. If he wanted to gain honor, he naturally had to pay the price. What kind of fighting technique was this? The young man swung his great axe and fought Xiao Bai. As for the candidates for the title of nobility, the floor of the room lit up. The young man was pinned to the ground and beaten violently. Xiao Bai raised his hand. The young man said coldly. His opponent was from District B. Without hesitation, Bu Fong activated the array again. Newcomers? Some people could have advanced long ago, but they still chose to fight for the title of nobility. The next moment, he came to the array. However, as the number of battles increased, Bu Fong's opponents became stronger and stronger. Those who fell behind would be eliminated. This was the law advocated by Void City. He didn't take a puppet seriously at first. Bu Fong was now a nobleman in District C. There were many people competing with him, and they definitely outnumbered 95-37. Rumble. The young man's aura fluctuated. His cultivation base, at the level of a saint of the Great Path, gave him enough confidence to be arrogant. Bu Fong's number was 95-37, which was also the room number. Bu Fong pointed at Xiao Bai and said, "Your opponent is him." Bu Fong returned to the room. The fighting pit would always keep an eye on the contestants and assign them opponent. The young man flew into a rage when he saw that. He protected himself with one hand while fighting back. Xiao Bai should be considered his weapon. A fight between saints of the Great Path was naturally not ordinary. The power of the cursed sword turned into a black cursed snake and swarmed toward Bufang. With a ripping sound, his clothes were torn to shreds. The young man felt a chill run down his spine. The scene was so terrifying that it was a great shock to his mind. Otherwise, he would really lose all his face. Your Excellency, you have the Viscount's token, so you can get a room in the fighting pit. This will be your base, and your number will be linked to the room. He sat down on a soft sofa, poured himself a glass of wine, and took a sip. Just one puppet was enough to suppress him to such an extent. With a jolt of his mental energy, he immediately activated the formation. He was somewhat frustrated. It took him so long to deal with a puppet. The young man was aggrieved. The consecutive defeats over the past few days had disheartened him. Bufang said after thinking for a moment. It was a burly young man with a huge axe on his back. The clothes-stripping maniac was like a fish in water here. He glanced at Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed, and he threw out a slap. After all, the cultivation resources were different. Buzz, no. It's not me. Considering the size of District C, Bufang understood why there were so many people in the fighting pit. The people in District B were very strong. At least, they could easily deal with the experts in District C. Bufang watched a few more matches. However, Bufang was not in a hurry to sign up. The young man was bewildered. The flesh and blood on his body fell off, looking extremely hideous. The array in the corner was the registration array. As long as he guided his mental force into it, the registration would be successful. A clanging sound rang out. He looked at the projection array in front of him. The young man chose to admit defeat. The fighting pit was extremely lively. The rules were cruel. After Xiao Bai evolved, he became stronger. As long as someone got close to him, they would not be able to use energy. Bufang was stunned. This young man was actually so awesome? After Bufang entered, not long after, someone came to receive Bufang. This combination was too strange. Bufang said. The noble from District C had his body obliterated. Only his remnant soul was left, drifting back miserably. Bufang sat on the sofa. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang's vermilion robe fluttered slowly in the cold cosmic wind. The iron puppet's fighting style was not conventional at all, and it was a close-quarters fight. Of course, his ranking was very low. Rumble, the guard said. It was another dead star. There was no doubt that this figure was Bufang's opponent. Every impact, every attack, made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Bufang began to look around the room. It was not very big, but it had everything he needed. To enter District B, he needed to win 10 consecutive matches against the nobles of District B. Only then would he have a chance to advance and qualify for the next round. In fact, the nobles of District C who wanted to rush into District B were all existences at the level of saints of the Great Path. The power of the curse corroded the nobles of District C and made them fall to the ground. The young man's face was swollen, and he was a little sad and angry. Fortunately, his opponent was a newcomer, so his match was not broadcasted by the projection array. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flickered. The fighting pit was the way to get into District C. Bufang stepped into it, with Xiao Bai at his side. Little Hu lay on Xiao Bai's shoulder, and Xiao Opi nestled on Xiao Bai's head, blowing bubbles. Bufang clapped his hands, spat out a fruit shell, and left with Xiao Bai. There were sofas, wooden tables, and chairs made of divine beast skins, as well as all kinds of strange projection arrays. The young man's hair was disheveled, and his eyes were wide. The spear knocked the axe away and nailed it to the ground. Xiao Bai. Beat him up. He learned the rules. The number was very important. He wanted to remember this guy's treacherous ways. Buzz, despicable. This is my subordinate. If you can't even defeat my subordinate, you're not qualified to be my opponent. The number of people in the fighting pit was beyond Bufang's expectation. Being able to enter District B was not only a change in status, but also a supreme honor. Bufang nodded. He discovered that the puppet had already wrapped itself around his body without him noticing. It was the same for a saint of the Great Path. What the hell? For the experts of District B, it was actually very interesting to fight for rankings in this fighting pit. In the room, there were many corners. Boom. The whole planet was blasted apart. The battle was fierce, and it ended in a miserable way. Suddenly, the young man focused his eyes, and the curse power wrapped around his body, bursting out with a terrifying aura. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed, and the flag behind him soared into the sky in an instant, smashing the cursed snake into pieces. Countess Xiaoqiu had said that if they wanted to enter District B from District C, they had to fight their way in. Xiao Bai and the young man kept fighting. The planet below began to explode, and flames soared into the sky. I don't have a ranking. I'm a newcomer. It was a guard in black armor. His duty was to guide Bufang and the other candidates who had entered the fighting pit. Bufang's buttocks sank deep into it. This comfortable feeling caused Bufang to be somewhat intoxicated. Following behind the guards, Bufang came to a small room around the fighting pit. There was a crystal tablet in the room, on which were the rankings and records of the battles. He turned his eyes and rested them on Bufang. His opponent was this skinny young man? Bam! As for the people of District B, if they lost in a row, they were likely to be eliminated. A mere puppet dares to be my opponent? Powerful energy swept out like a waterfall. Even his lower body was torn apart. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.